Grandma, I don't feel good. My stomach hurts and I feel nauseous. Can we please just go back? I promise we can take Lucy on a walk a little bit later, I said, trying to sound as sick as possible. I guess that is fine, my grandmother said almost disappointingly, as she really wanted to take me to the peak this year. When we turned around, I made sure to keep myself between where I had seen the monster and my grandmother. As we walked back down, feeling the dread continued to get worse. This feeling of hopelessness that you are no longer the scariest out there anymore. That at any moment's notice, something could decide to take you out of this world. When we got back to the car, I noticed we were still the only ones out there, which is strange, as it was usually a place to go hiking that was very popular. Lucy reluctantly got back into the SUV, preferring to stay outside and keep watch while my grandmother got in the car. While I finally got Lucy in, and I got myself in, I looked ahead on the trail. There was something, somewhat obscured by the foliage. It was a hulking animal of some sort. It had the face of a dog with its long black snout, but was easily bigger than any black bear I'd ever seen before. It stared at me, into my soul once again, but it never moved, only stared at me, which was almost scarier than it charging us. We went back home where I sat in my room and immediately called my papa. Honestly, he would be the only one that would believe me. 2 days later, my grandmother told me she had seen something weird on the news of a few hikers going missing on that very same trail. She thanked me for convincing us to leave. I still have never ever gone back to those mountains. Even as I've gotten bigger and more experienced hunting and such, I just don't trust it. I now carry a serrated pocket knife that my papa had given me for my 15th birthday everywhere I go. I will never forget the advice he had given me.
So, I and 2 of my buddies were up Lone Peak Canyon with a plan to sleep under the stars and leave the next day. So we got everything set up and decided to go swim in the lake. On our way back, we saw a single deer with abnormally large eyes and ears, and it had odd proportions in general. I've grown up in Utah Valley my whole life, and I've seen thousands of deer, so I know what they usually look and act like. The deer was sitting on a rock like a dog, and it turned its head to watch us without giving any reaction. Its head seemed to turn and follow while its body stayed perfectly still. It almost looked like its head was detached from its body. I decided that it was just an odd occurrence and that I should just ignore it. This was at 4 p.m. About 30 minutes later, we were at our campsite and we saw the same deer chasing another, but it stopped and continued to just look at us for maybe 5 minutes. When we all looked away, it almost just disappeared. Maybe it took off as soon as we looked away, but this was also odd. 30 minutes after that, we saw the same deer, probably 200 yards away up on the side of the hill overlooking us. It stayed there for at least 45 minutes, just staring at us. The 4th time we saw it was later around 9:30 p.m. when we were in our sleeping bags getting ready to go to bed. The deer came up from the river that we were next to, probably 20 feet away, and just looked at us again for maybe 2 minutes and then went back down. The same thing happened again in the same spot 15 minutes later. It almost seemed to be checking if we had gone to sleep yet. It continued to check on us one more time, 15 minutes later again. At this point, I was a little freaked out, but didn't want to say anything because I was afraid my friends would say I was imagining things. So we all tried to go to bed, and at about 10:30 to 10:45, we started hearing something maybe 10 feet away just under the hill that led to where the river was. we continued to hear what sounded like a deer walking in the river and coming to check on us. Every time it would get close, we would start talking and shine our lights into the trees to see if we could see anything. This happened enough to the point that we grabbed everything and left at midnight. On our way down, my buddies said they kept seeing silhouettes off to our sides. The entire way down, we kept seeing weird things like a deer right next to the road staring at the mountainside at literally nothing, not moving or reacting or grazing. We continued to see more and more deer that were behaving oddly. But remember that we have all seen thousands of deer just up that canyon itself, and they never behaved like that. Please, anyone, let me know if you think it might have been something.
When I was 8, maybe even 7, I had a disturbing encounter with some creature or entity. I lived in the Appalachian mountain range of Pennsylvania. It was November, around when daylight saving time occurred. I remember it was supposed to be a school day, but since the snow was so heavy, the buses were not able to drive out in the morning, so school was canceled for a snow day. I was so excited to spend the rest of the day outside in the snow. We had an acre of property, going quite far back into the woods. I was walking deep into the forest to a small frozen pond past my property line. Suddenly, the woods were dead silent. No birds, no wildlife scurrying around, absolutely nothing. I remember thinking it was strange, but kept walking. I really wanted to make it to the pond. I should have turned right then and there, but I was just a naive little kid. After I reached the pond, everything was still completely silent, and the hairs on the back of my neck felt like they were rising. I started to feel frightened, but I didn't exactly know why. I felt like something bad was going to happen to me if I didn't leave at that exact moment, so I decided to run back home. As I arrived back at my yard, I realized it was so late. The sun was setting. My mom was running outside asking where I was literally all day. And to never disappear ever like that again. Nothing of this ever made sense to me. I had only been outside for about 20 minutes. I left my house with my snow gear on at around 10 a.m., right after getting the snow day call. It was almost 8 p.m., meaning I had been gone for around 10 hours. I have no idea how I had been gone for such a long amount of time. I remember only being out there for just a few minutes. I don't know if this was some sort of creature encounter. I've heard of a lot of lost time being attributed to being hypnotized or just being in the presence of these skinwalkers or Wendigo type creatures. Has anyone else ever had this happen to them? Was it some type of creature? I didn't see anything while there at all. I don't think I lost track of time, and I definitely didn't fall and hit my head or anything. What do you think happened? Please let me know in the comments below.
A little backstory about myself. I'm a 15-year-old girl, and I've always been shy my whole life because my parents treated me like I was an enemy to them. Anyways, on to the skinwalker story. This happened when I used to live in California. I and my brother Connor were playing in the backyard of our little house when we hear this scream coming from the woods. A little something about our house. It's a 60s to 70s house, but my father took awful care of it, that the floors in the house was rotting and the back porch was slowly collapsing, like it was very badly taken care of. Anyways, let's get back to the story. I and my brother got curious as to what was making that sound, so, like any other weirdos we investigated the sound. So about 3 minutes of walking, we hear it again. but the scream was much higher pitched and much closer. So my brother Connor makes the biggest mistake of his life. He screams back at it trying to mimic this thing, and the next thing we know is that we see it and it's charging at us, and we just bolted. We get back to the house and I open the back door. I got my brother inside and I legit slammed the back door. But after slamming the door, the entire floor under us just collapsed and we both fall into the basement. My father eventually walks into the house after work and starts walking towards the kitchen. And before he steps in, he sees that the floor collapsed and sees us injured. My brother had a broken arm and I was impaled by a metal pipe. Thankfully, we both made a full recovery.
This might sound strange, but as a child I used to see things that are not normal. And not just that, I also suffer from sleep paralysis, which started when I was 11 years old. And when I experience sleep paralysis, I often see otherworldly creatures or leave my body. Aside from all of this, I have had other strange paranormal experiences too. But there is one creature I often see. I have written about it before. This angel-like creature that often visits me. This angel-like creature is tall, shaped like a human, but tall with angel-like wings, completely dressed in white and faceless, but speaks with a woman's voice. It has told me many times before that if I ever have any troubles in life, then I might just call on its name. When I ask who he is, it usually doesn't reply, but finds a way to draw a cross so that I can see it, and so that I am left with the image of a cross burnt into my mind. So, this one cold evening, I was out after dark. I was in my 20s. I drew cold air and suddenly, it seemed like I was smoking like a chimney when I exhaled. My hands were freezing. I was out camping with friends and my husband, and I had gotten myself lost. I left to go to the bathroom, but being a curious creature, the urge to go on a dark adventure suddenly distracted me. I left the bathroom and declined to go back to the campsite. I decided to rather go into the bushes, into that area, which we were not actually allowed to go. They had closed the area off and it made me exceedingly more curious as to why. I climbed over the chain they had placed between the two trees and ignored the no entry sign. I ventured deeper and deeper into the dark. I suddenly heard something. I followed the sound. It turned out to be a water bug. It ran off and scared me. I sighed with relief. I held tighter to my torch. Suddenly, the air became even colder. I ventured off deeper into the dark. When I turned around after deciding that it was too dangerous now, and realized that I was lost, I had been met with a crossroads and didn't know which path or road led back to the campsite anymore. My heart began to pound a little. I tried my best not to panic, but then I heard a weird sound that I knew all too well. It is a strange sound that is usually made by that angelic-like creature that I mentioned earlier. Since I was a kid, I have heard it several times, and I knew, if it was near, there was always something to be scared of, because danger was always not far away. Like all the other times before I had seen it, bad things shortly happened after. It was only then that I realized that there were other familiar beings there as well, that I have also seen before. But these ones I believe I've only seen once or twice. 3 shadow figures that chased and hunted me down when I was little. They created the sound of this utterly evil laughing. Then I saw them stretching out their shadowy hands towards me, and they began to move towards me fast. Following the moonlight to keep themselves visually in sight, I dropped my torch and began to run. I suddenly remembered the cross the angelic creature drew before. I turned around and before I could even say his name, these 3 shadow figures just disappeared. Still lost, I saw a small narrow path that led from one of the main pathways that I was on even deeper into the bushes. I began following it, curiosity overtaking me again. Then I came across an old building that looked like it had been out of use for many years. I didn't have my torch with me anymore, but luckily it was a full moon, and I could see somewhat well. I tried peeking in through the windows. Each window I peeked in revealed darkness. It was too dark inside the building for me to see anything on the inside though. Not even the full moon helped with that. But I tried another window too. I decided to try all of the windows, and to my greatest regret, I saw, inside the cabin, some sort of creature. I don't even know how to describe it. I guess my best comparison would be a werewolf of some sort. This thing looked like it was messing with an axe though, or carrying it or something. Because I could see it, or rather hear it, swinging it around. I ran back as fast as I could. I had no idea where I was going, but eventually, I made it back to where there was a security guard for the campground. I told them all about everything, but he didn't believe me and reassured me there was no such thing out there. Eventually, I made it back to my tent, but I never slept. I've never really told anybody about what happened that night, because I don't think people will believe me. My family traveled a lot, only because we were a military family. If we had the choice, we would stay in one place forever. Now, because we traveled a lot, we had a fair share of stories. Us getting robbed, natural disasters, car crashes, but none like this one. And what makes it suspicious is that it happened to only me. It was January 14th in New York. I turned 9 in 5 weeks. So if anyone else had a birthday as a kid, you would know that I was hyped. It was already bad enough that I had anxiety and insomnia, so I would stay up nearly every night, and this night was no different. After a good dinner of spaghetti, I went straight to bed. My little brothers were already asleep and my parents were relaxing in the room watching TV. I tried to get some sleep by putting my head under the pillow. Every now and then I would peek at the clock. 9:01. 10:13, 11:20. I got up to check if my parents were still up. Sure enough, they were asleep, TV still on. I went back to my room to try to sleep more. It got cold fast. I looked outside and it was snowing lightly. I looked at my clock and it was 11:27. I got slightly annoyed at how I was unable to sleep. I flopped back on my bed and turned into a blanket burrito. I managed to fall asleep eventually. Then, I woke up terrified. I looked at the clock. It was off. I slowly walked to my clock to see if it was unplugged. It was still plugged in. I started to cry a bit. I then heard a noise outside. It sounded like a mix of a goat and a coyote. I looked outside. It was heavily snowing at this point. I couldn't see anything clearly, not even the houses on the other side. I then heard something fall and break downstairs. I started to have a panic attack. This happens rarely. I then instinctively took out my pocket knife my dad gave me when I was still in Cub Scouts. I quickly opened it and walked out the door. Something sounded like it was sprinting at my door with light footsteps, then slammed my door shut. It opens inwards. I ran back to my bed and held up my dog stuffed animal I named 10. I decided to man up, or little boy up, and ran to the door. I opened it and held my knife to the side. Nothing was there. I ran downstairs. Again, nothing was there. I went to the kitchen. Apparently a bunch of my mom's spice shakers broke. I forgot what specific ones, but they were expensive. Fortunately, both of my parents are heavy sleepers. I looked at the microwave. No time. It appears that all the power was off. Probably from the snowstorm if I had to guess. My little brain decided to walk outside for whatever reason. I put on shoes, a coat, and went to the back door. Nothing. Nothing at all was out there. I heard another noise though. It was the same noise. It sounded like it came from the woods. I then went to the fence and peeked through a little crack in between the planks. I saw a dead deer laying down. I will not go into details, but it looked like a pile of ketchup mixed with squished up tomatoes. The smell was bad. It seemed fresh. I walked back to the porch very and reasonably disturbed. I sat down on a snow-covered chair. I was slightly shivering. I heard heavy footsteps coming from the woods, but as they got closer, they sounded a bit weird, to say the least. I walked back into my house slowly as to not alert whatever it was. Then I went upstairs. I locked the door, both locks, and then heard a gravelly deep moan coming from upstairs right as I was about to walk up them. I walked up the stairs and stood in front of the closet. It stopped as soon as I took the last step. At this point, I had enough and jerked the door open. Again, there was nothing there. Then I heard scurrying in the living room. I jumped down the stairs. This was a bad decision. I tripped and landed on my face flat. I woke up dazed but not in any pain yet. I looked at the living room and saw a large, tall, bulky figure. It seemed to be gray, but I did not know for sure. It had large, empty eye holes, and its mouth looked like melted cheese. I stayed on the floor. The thing did not move. It just stared at me blankly. Then its jaw gaped open slowly, about the size of our TV. It then ran off into the kitchen, and I heard the back door close. I was laying on the floor for a good while. I then got up and cleaned my nose, surprisingly not broken, but very bruised. I slowly crawled up my bed and slept there peacefully. My parents woke up to find the spices broken, blood on the floor, and a dead deer outside. I told them what happened, but no dice. I remember it clearly to this day, and they still do not believe me. Luckily, we moved to Texas, and there's no more snow for me.
I grew up in rural areas my entire life. Whether it was beef farms in Tennessee or living in the middle of nowhere, Florida, I've done it all. Growing up without access to most commonalities we've grown accustomed to. Yeah, that's right. We had no internet, no TV, and yep, you guessed it, no cell phones. I know, the horror, right? I like to think of us as the last true generation before the internet age. Not to say dial-up wasn't around, but most of us at the time didn't really have access to it. But honestly, it really wasn't that bad. I mean, outside of the long, boring summer days where we'd be cooking alive in the fields. Living out in an old Civil War cabin in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee definitely showed out some interesting experiences. This story is going to be one of many that I share. That is, if you all enjoy this one, that is. The story starts off like any other, really. It was a typical Friday night, and my brothers and I were home alone. Being that we didn't have much of anything to entertain ourselves with, we began playing Manhunt in and around the house. Most of the time we opted to stay indoors as it was pitch black outside. For a bit more context, our cabin was situated on top of a rather steep hill that had a long winding driveway running down it. Our cabin had a basement level, the main level where most of the house was, and the upstairs that only had my room. We also had a back deck that was situated about 10 to 12 feet up in the air, if I had to guess. Anyway, back to the story at hand. It was pitch black outside, and going much further than our porch at night wasn't really something anyone enjoyed doing out there. The game was fun, but was already getting pretty monotonous with the little room we had inside. At this point, I had the bright idea to wander off outside and then hide on the roof to make the game more interesting. Well, this would soon be one of the biggest regrets in my life. At first, everything seemed fine. It was rather cold and it was nearing fall, and the weather was just starting to change. There was a slight breeze, and the air was really crisp and calming. After a few minutes of sitting up on the roof, though, something felt off. I had been practically mesmerized by the sound of crickets and cicadas. I realized, though, that all the noise had suddenly stopped. This seemed very odd to me, but at the same time, being as naive as I was at the time, I didn't realize that this only meant something bad was going to happen. I sit there as still as possible for a moment, trying to listen as closely as I can. I just can't seem to hear anything aside from the slight breeze through the leaves. Then as quickly as the silence came, an eruption of noise came from the other end of the roof. For a bit more detail, we had a metal roof at the time, making it very easy to hear when things walk on the roof. It sounded like something had landed on the opposite side end of the roof. I looked over, but could see nothing. This, of course, left me rather unnerved, and my first thought was to exit the situation. Before panicking fully, I remembered it could be my brothers messing with me, since surely they would have given up on looking for me by now. I opened up my window and called my brothers. They both ran up the stairs shouting and complaining that the roof was off limits. As my older brother got to me, I had asked him if he had been messing with me and making the noise on the roof. He of course denied this and wanted to come up and investigate. So he and I slowly made our way to the middle of the roof and listened for a moment. Everything went quiet around us, as it had earlier. At this point, I was already on edge and ready to karate chop a demon right in the neck if I had to. We hear what sounds like a pounding noise on the far end of the roof in the opposite direction of where we were standing. After what I think were 3 sets of 6 pounding noises, it charged us. I think it did anyway. It sounded like hooves were running on the metal roof, but the only issue was we couldn't see a thing. The entire roof was clear, aside from us, that is, but somehow we were hearing these footsteps. It quickly approached us and began running circles around us. I held my arms out to try and see if I could feel anything, but I couldn't. The weirdest part of it all, though, was that I could feel the vibrations of the footsteps all around us, but I couldn't see or feel anything in the air. These footsteps circled around us for what seemed like many minutes, but were probably no more than a minute or so at most. It suddenly stopped circling us, and we could hear the steps draw off the roof and then disappear into thin air. We quickly ran inside, locked all the windows and doors, and huddled up inside, freaked the hell out.
I and my boyfriend and our first child moved into our first home together. My daughter Isabella would have only been 2 or 3 months old. The house we moved into was not creepy looking at all. It was run down, so the rent was cheap. It was a high-set house with 3 bedrooms and a fireplace. The paint was all yellow from years of smoke and wear and tear that nobody bothered to maintain. There was a giant hole in the wall in my daughter's room, but we were allowed to paint and fix it up with permission from the owner. The house was looking good. It was so surreal to have our first home, as a new family. Things were great until weird stuff started to happen once we were settled in. Temperatures would drop in certain spots of the house. Watches would stop working, and cell phones would glitch out every now and then. They would call numbers on their own, get into different apps entirely, and just simply weird things like that. Isabella would often wake up all through the night terrified, like something was tormenting her. Well, years passed by, and Isabella is now around 3 years old, still having the temperature drops and all of that other stuff, but her toys would also now go off on their own, at all random times of the day and night. Isabella started to tell me about this person she called Scary Hands, and how she did not want to go to sleep because Scary Hands lived in her room. So I made a monster spray bottle and sprayed a bit of water under the bed and told her there were no monsters here. Isabella became obsessed with this monster's Scary Hands. Every night it was the same drama. One day Isabella was drawing a picture, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I choked on my coffee and asked what she was drawing. I was chilled to my bone. She drew a pink room with herself in the bed and a very twisted person, all with black pen and flies with skeleton-like hands. She showed me Scary Hands, which were a corpse in her room of a woman. I asked her who that was, and Isabella replied with, "That's Scary Hands, Mom." I asked Isabella another question. I said, what does she do? Isabella said she makes weird sounds and comes out from behind my cupboard every night. She puts her hands on my bed and watches me. The cupboard in her room was where the big hole in the wall was. When my boyfriend came home from work that night, I showed him Isabella's drawing. He said, with his skepticism, It is probably something she has seen on TV, which I do not know how, as she has only ever watched cartoons. My boyfriend brushed it off as nothing. I, on the other hand, did not. When it came to bedtime, I put a little cross on her cupboard. I told her not to worry about Scary Hands. She said, "Mom, Scary Hands are mean and she does not like you." I said, "Why?" And Isabella said she wants us all dead. I was shocked, and I said, "Well, Uncle Shane's dog is going to get her." He owned an excessively big Mastiff cross, which was very intimidating to people who did not know her. She said, "Mom, Scary Hands said she is going to die. Kip the dog is going to die." I just did not know what to say. I gave her a big cuddle, and I was just about to leave her room when I heard a massive boom. A glass jar on the fridge full of coins exploded at that very moment. Glass flew by my face, nearly cutting me. If I were one step further, I would have been killed by the glass easily. It would have been in my face and neck. I was horrified. My boyfriend said it was just a coincidence. The glass broke at that moment. The next day we got a visit from Shane. He was upset. His dog Kip had a seizure and passed away. I could not believe it. It was exactly what my daughter said was going to happen. Time passed by and the weird stuff was still happening. I remember I was having a bath, home alone, and water turned ice cold all of a sudden. Like I was sitting in a bath filled with ice. I had this terrifying feeling completely wash over my body, and then I could hear all the chairs in the kitchen being scraped and dragged across the wooden floor. All the doors were being slammed. It was so loud, and I was terrified. I thought someone was going to rob the house. Then it went silent, and the water returned to the lovely hot bath that I ran. I was a mess. I ran to my phone I had in the kitchen and called my boyfriend to come home, as he was at a friend's house. He raced home and searched the house. Nothing was taken. The chairs were in the same place. It horrified him to see how upset I was. I begged him that we needed to move. He did not want to because the rent was affordable and it wasn't in a good area of town. So, a few weeks later, we were going to have some drinks at a club on Halloween night. Grandma had been watching Isabella, so it was great to have some fun. We were with a bunch of friends and we were on our way home. Just as we were approaching our house, all the lights were on, blinds and windows all open, the TV on full bore. We all froze. One of our friends, Troy, said, "Bro, I think someone broke into your house." As we left the doors, they were locked, lights were off, blinds were shut. So the men ran into the house while I was outside with the girls and I started to cry. The house is haunted. I know it is. My boyfriend came back and he said the door was locked, and no one could get in because the windows were all locked too. It was a high-set house as well, as I said. He said it is fine. The next second, as we were all standing outside the house, all the doors started slamming and the lights were going off and on. The girls started screaming and freaking out, and my boyfriend was completely shocked. He was frozen. So that night we got a hotel room, and we moved into my mom's while we were applying for a new house. We got another house. Time went by as we had our second child, and when he turned 3, he mentioned Scary Hands one night when I was tucking him into bed. My heart sank again. Who are these Scary Hands and why is she tormenting my children? My boyfriend's mother got right into the unknown and I told her everything. I just wanted this to stop. She came over one day with a huge Bible, some religious artifacts, or coins or something. She told me what they were meant to do, and then she went through my house. She left the Bible open on a certain page, and she said to leave it and do not touch it. Whatever she did seemed to work. So Isabella is 11 now, and we are now married with 4 children, and we just bought our first home. Hey Swamp Dweller, I'm a big fan of your channel. I've been listening to your channel for a few months now and I figured I might as well share my paranormal experience. If you decide to read it, great. If not, that's okay too. When I was about 12 years old, I lived in a small town called Johnsonburg, Pennsylvania, with my mom and 3 brothers. We had just moved into a new house. I had a strange feeling about the house from the beginning. The previous owner was an elderly man whom I never learned the name of. I'm not sure if he died in the house or not, but I could just tell from looking at it, something was not quite right. Anyway, nothing major really ever happened for a year or so. Just your normal strange noises that could be explained away if you really tried. It was a pretty old house after all, but I always felt like I was being watched when I was alone in that house or in my room. Sometimes, when I was there alone, I could hear someone walking around in the attic, which was my oldest brother's room while he was not there. Or sometimes, I would hear my name being called in my mother's voice, but when I went downstairs to answer, she would either not be there or deny that she ever called me in the first place. It did not start getting bad until I was 13 and my parents' divorce was finally official, and it kind of made me angry that my mom was so happy about it. My dad isn't perfect. Back then he was a heavy drinker and a workaholic, but he would come home to whisk me away my little brother for summers and stuff like that. My family is very blended. My 2 older brothers are my mom's first marriage, but my dad still loved them like his own sons. My older sister and myself are from their marriage. I also have another older sister from my dad's first marriage as well. Anyway, despite all my dad's faults, he had never raised a hand to any of us no matter what. He is my dad and I love him no matter what. Anyways, so I was your typical angsty preteen girl at that point, and that's when things started to get worse. I would see a shadow out of the corner of my eye almost every single day, as well as hear whispering in my ear while I was trying to sleep at night. I have never had sleep paralysis, nor do I even remember any dreams I've ever had. So to me, that is proof no matter what my mom tried to tell me. When I told her about all of this, she would always write me off about anything negative I had to say about the house, because her friend is the one who bought it and rented it to us. I now know that he most likely was her pimp, but that's another story I'd rather not get into. Anyway, one night I woke up feeling intense pain in my back. I had a full body mirror in my room, so I lifted my shirt and saw scratches all over. I know this sounds really cliche, but I swear on my life it is true. I knew my mom would not believe me, so I went to my middle brother's room and he was a little annoyed that I woke him up so late on a school night until he saw that I was crying. I showed him my back and told him about the experiences I had been having, and he consoled me and let me sleep in his room that night, sleeping on the floor so I could have the bed because my brothers are pretty awesome. I consulted with all of my brothers after that, and turns out they all had a few strange experiences as well, just not as bad as me. My oldest brother eventually moved out of the attic and started to share a room with my middle brother, but would not tell us why. Anyway, one day I and my little brother, who is only a year younger than me, were playing in his room. We were pretending to be characters from Ben 10, when me, having the attention span of a toddler, noticed that some of the paint on his wall had started to chip, and me, having no impulse control, started to pick at it. He kept telling me to stop, afraid that he would get in trouble, but I assured him that I would take the blame since Mom blamed me for everything that went wrong in her life anyway. He wouldn't get in trouble. Long story short, behind my brother's wall, right above his bed were the words "run." They were carved in the wall, and it looked like someone had carved it with their fingernails. Needless to say, we both slept in our brother's room for a week. The final incident happened one night when I was home alone again. I knew no one was going to be coming back that night since my brothers were all staying at their respective friends' houses, and I don't really like to think about what my mom was doing. I had friends but didn't feel like going anywhere that day, and so I was sitting at home around midnight watching That's So Raven on Disney Channel. Both of my dogs and my cat were with me in the room. When I started hearing someone walking downstairs, I froze and listened. Well, maybe one of the boys came back, but I didn't hear the front door open. My dog's ears have started to perk up when the footsteps started coming up the stairs. My house wasn't very big. The upstairs is just one long hallway, and my brother's room at the time. After that was my room, and that's about it up there. Oh yeah, there's also a door to the attic up there. I turned my TV off and hid under my blankets. At this point, the dogs had started barking and my cat hissed and ran off under the bed, when my door suddenly flung open by itself. I stupidly looked out from under my covers just in time to see a pale, gray hand reaching into my room. I screamed and hid back under the blanket for what felt like hours until finally, the dog stopped barking and the house went quiet again. The next day I tried to tell my mom about what happened, and once again she denied it, saying there was nothing supernatural about the house, and threatening to up my meds and have me committed if I didn't stop causing her problems. But literally as we were fighting about it, we were the only two in the house. The front door, which was locked, slammed shut from downstairs. I thought my mom would finally believe me after that. Now she said it was just the wind. I moved in with my dad that summer. I couldn't take it anymore. Since the house had been knocked down after being sold in a town auction, I'm not sure whatever really happened of it. I don't know if it was the old man who was haunting me or some darker entity that was feeding off the negative energy or something. But I have told this story to some friends over the years. This was many years ago, and I'm 25 now. But I still think about this from time to time. I started listening to your channel and figured, hey, why not share it? Anyway, I'm sorry if it's a little hard to follow. I hope you end up reading it on the channel. Hi, Swamp Dweller. I do not know if you would be interested in a story from England. It is kind of long-winded and not overly scary, but it's a pretty weird experience that me and my partner would never forget. To set the scene, we live in a busy city in the South Midlands of England. We have a bully breed dog and take him out for walks in surrounding parks and woods quite often. I am quite into the paranormal and have experienced lots of things. My mom is a spiritual medium, so I guess it comes with the territory. My partner, however, is a science graduate and is a very everything has an explanation sort of person. Anyway, on this day we decided to go to a popular picnic park just on the outskirts of the city. It is almost always full of families, dog walkers, and picnickers. It was late spring and the temperature was just starting to hit summer heat. It was a sunny day, not a cloud in the sky and no wind. The park was full of the usual parents and kids and their family dogs, old couples going for walks and the like. Here in England, bully breeds are still quite stigmatized and feared, so we really avoid going where there are a lot of people. Not that our dog is dangerous or anything, he is just overly friendly and people freak out when he trots up to greet them. So we decided to go a bit off the beaten track. To give you a rough idea, the park has a small lake in the center, with paths and benches that surround it. Just off one of these paths are a few farmers' fields in a thick wooded area which snakes around into another path which eventually leads back to the park. We decided to go through the cattle gate which leads through the farmers' fields. It was so hot and beautiful that day that nothing spooky or creepy even crossed our minds. Even though you could no longer see anyone, you could still hear kids playing and dogs barking. As we came up to the wooded area, whilst on the dirt path alongside it, I noticed a man walking through the thick brush. I thought this was weird because he was coming from the opposite end of the woods, which literally leads to nothing. No houses or roads or anything. Just endless fields and woods as far as I know. I just told myself he must be looking for his dog or something. My partner noticed him too, and we shared a look at each other, like, what a weirdo, and carried on walking. But I could not help but look at him. He looked so strange. It must have been close to 30 degrees, and he was in a thick black hoodie, black trousers or sweats. He had longish, dirty blonde hair, and maybe was around our age, maybe mid-20s. But the weirdest fact is he had a dazed sort of smile on his face, and his head kind of tilted to one sidewinder. When he walked, he swayed from side to side slightly. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, and was telling myself that he was just a stoner or something looking for his dog. He was not calling or making noises to get a dog's attention, though, or anything which was even stranger. Anyway, I kept looking back over my shoulder every couple of minutes. He was in the brush for a little while, but then joined the path we were on and began walking our way. He must have been about 30 feet behind us. I noticed how tall he was, because now that we were on the path, I could pretty much size him up. He must have been about 6'9", maybe even 7 feet. He was huge, maybe like 17 or 18 stone. 240 to 250 pounds more or less. Around this point, we noticed everything went silent. There were no kids laughing, no indistinctive family chatter, no dogs barking, no birds tweeting, nothing. The only sound was the sound of our footsteps and wind, but there was no wind. It was roasting hot, not even a slight breeze yet. We could hear the wind blowing through the trees. Even though the sun was beating down, it felt darker somehow, like everything was, I don't know, desaturated. My partner started to freak out, and strangely, so did our dog. Now this really struck me as weird. Our boy is the kind of dog who would greet anyone, or run up to them to play. But no, he would not even look back at me or the man. My partner and dog started to speed up to get away from the wooded area and this weird behemoth of a man. I really started to freak out myself, but did not want to upset my partner even further, so I kept my cool, quiet, and kept my pace. I looked over my shoulder again and he was closer, maybe 25 feet away at this point. Now for a bit of context, as you exit the wooded area, you come to a path which is surrounded on either side with tall, thick bushes, and it curves around widely to lead you back to the main park. The curve is so wide that you can see far ahead, but you can only see the bushes where it curves, sort of thing. Neither of the exits are in view. As we reach this path, I check again, and the guy is even closer now. It is still silent. All I can hear is the faint wind sounds in our footsteps, but nothing from the man. He is still smiling in that dazed sort of way, and still kind of swaying. Everything still felt weird and dull. It's the only way I can describe it. And I thought to myself, if this weird bloke is going to try something, I'm going to have to protect my partner. I'm only 5'8" myself, and not much of a fighter, so I grabbed my car and house keys and put them between my fingers in my pocket. If this dude wanted to try anything, I'd smash him in the face and leg it. I'm not fast either, but I convinced myself I'd be faster than him. Just for a little bit of a reference though, don't put your keys in between your knuckles, you're just gonna break your hand. I check over my shoulder again and he is even closer still. I start to hype myself up. He was coming and I was ready. I realized I could not hear him at that moment though. He was probably about 15 feet behind me now. My partner and dog had literally hightailed it up the path, but why couldn't I hear the footsteps from them? Another quick glance and he was right behind me, not even 5 feet away now. This was it. If I was going to do anything, it had to be now. If I could keep the element of surprise on my side, I might stand a chance and give us the opportunity to run. I swung around as quickly as I could and went to shout at him and swipe, but he was gone. There was nothing there, no man and no sign of him whatsoever. I paused and looked around. He could not have run back along the path. He could not be that quick. I would still be able to see him as the path winds around so widely he would still be in view. He could not have jumped through either side of the path into one of the rows of bushes, as I would have heard it and seen the rustling of the bushes or something like that. He had just vanished. I stayed there for a moment, and only when I decided to walk on to check on if my other half and my dog were okay, I realized I could hear the park again. The wind's noises had gone, and the day returned to normal. The sunlight was no longer dull, and everything seemed normal. I got shivers and ran to catch up. I asked my partner if they had seen him go anywhere, but they did not see anything. They just said he really freaked them out and they did not want to be there anymore. I could see that they were really shaken. The dog was back to normal though, wagging his tail and wanting to play and explore. We decided to cut our walk short and drive home. Shortly after we got home, I rang my mom and told her about it. She advised me to check reports for missing people or deaths related to the area, which I did, and weirdly, lots of people have died there by suicide or overdose. But none of the people I found online matched this person's description. I tried to forget about it and get back to normal life and all that. I was applying to go back to college at the time, so I did not really need to be thinking about giant ghost men. After a few days, it had left our minds and we got back to some sort of normality. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night and opened my eyes. As they adjust to the darkness, I look up at the ceiling where this orange glow of the street lamp shines through our window, and my heart stops. He was there, stood over our bed. He was so tall that his head was right below our ceiling light. And he still had that weird, dazed smile all lit up in the orange glow. I jump up and punch as hard as I can, but my fist does not meet anything, because there was nothing there. I turn on the light and look around. Nothing. I have never seen him since, but after seeing him in our bedroom, our apartment, felt horrid afterwards. I never felt homey or safe, and we would hear horrible things. For example, at one point in the middle of the night, I heard my own voice call my partner's name from the other side of our bedroom door. We heard walking in our attic, which was too low for people to walk in, and our pets would not sleep alone. We left that flat after a year or so of dealing with that weird ghostly experience. My partner, of course, kept denying that it was ghostly, just that it could not be explained. There were other reasons for us leaving, like we wanted to expand and get ourselves a house and garden, but my main reason for leaving that area was because of that man. I have not seen him since, and I hope I never do again. We have now been in our new house for about a year and have not experienced anything strange. A few things have happened, but nothing scary or completely unexplainable. It has been about 2 years or so since this happened, and we both still refuse to go to that park. Daylight or not, I do have a few more freaky stories, so if you're interested, please let me know. Thanks for taking the time to read about our experience, and if anyone in England has witnessed something similar, I would love to know in the comments down below. My name is Luke. No need to conceal identities here. Just want to share what happened. This weekend, on Saturday morning, 1/9/2021, I took a couple of my friends, Cody and Austin, out to my favorite campsite in the Mark Twain Forest just outside the small town of Chadwick, Missouri. I helped them set up camp, and had a beer with them, and then left just before sundown. Sunday morning, I came back to bring them a case of Budweiser and check in on them. They were gone, cleaned up and looked as if they were never there. Now, I was glad they cleaned up and did not leave a mess, but I found it quite odd since they told me they planned to rough it out there for a month or two to save up money and buy land. I decided to grab a beer and take a hike as I had time to kill. On this hike, I got about 45 yards west of the site and saw a shredded and mangled coyote covered in blood. I could tell there had been a struggle within about a 10-yard radius, and I know I have heard strange things out here plenty of times as I spend almost every weekend out here at that site. I know these woods well, day and night. I had also told Cody and Austin to keep their weapons close and their tent closed after they go to bed, because they might hear strange animals close by. I told them to keep food locked in the truck and all that. Anyway, after seeing this coyote, I got somewhat spooked just by the nature of its condition. I do not know any animal that kills that violently or kills for sport. I head back out of the woods and text them jokingly saying, "Didn't even get through the night, huh?" To which he replies, "Dude, if you had heard what we heard, it sounded like a coyote got ripped in half like 40 yards west of the site." After that, I told him exactly what I saw. Once I got back to town, I went to a buddy's house for his birthday and told everybody about what had happened. Most did not believe me at all, so I offered to load up anybody in my truck that does not believe me and to take them to see it for themselves. Of course, given this opportunity, nobody wanted to go. But another friend of mine, Eli, said, "Hell yeah, let's go." So I took Eli out there. By the time we got there, it was about 9 at night. Fairly dark out there. All we had were 2 flashlights, a machete, and a buck knife. We set on the short walk to where I had seen the mangled coyote so he could see it with his own eyes. To our surprise, the coyote was gone, but the drying pools of blood and signs of a struggle were all still there. Around the time we were looking at all of this, all the sounds of the woods went silent. Even the strong flowing creek about 30 feet away from us seemed to have suddenly stopped flowing. Dead silence completely surrounded us. I have camped here hundreds of times and have never experienced anything like this. The woods here have never gone silent. A little freaked out by the silence, we decided to head back to my Yukon. For some reason, it seemed like the walk back was twice as far. Mind you, I know this area like the back of my hand. I know that I did not get us lost. As we got closer to the truck, the sound started slowly coming back, like Mother Nature was turning a volume knob slowly. Then, for the first time ever, I felt fear in these woods. I have never been scared even when hearing animals near my camp, even when we saw a black bear a couple of years ago. But for some reason, almost pure terror set into both of us. So we ran the last bit back to the truck and hightailed it out of there. About 150 yards from the camp, my Yukon was slammed sideways off the trail. I was only doing about 15 to 20 miles per hour as these trails are narrow and it was dark. However, during the day I have gone more than 40 miles per hour with no problem. My truck is all-wheel drive and has almost brand new all-terrain tires on it, and I have never felt it slip like that before, especially sideways. Right before we blasted sideways, there was a loud slam on my passenger side rear door, quarter panel area. After that, I floored it to get out of there as quickly as possible, and no sooner than we started hauling ass out of there did both Eli and myself instantly feel sick to our stomachs. Once we got about 30 miles from the woods and out of Chadwick, all the way to Sparta, we stopped at the gas station to look at the truck. There is now a massive swiping smudge and dent on the side of my Yukon that was never there before. Neither of us were remotely impaired, as I had only had one beer that day, and that was around noon. And Eli, I don't even think he drinks at all. I've never even seen him drink. I later took him home and we told a few other people what had happened. I was feeling sicker by the moment and my head was pounding. I just could not speak complete sentences and could not keep balance very well, so I went to bed. The following day, which was Monday, I woke up and went to work, feeling sicker than I ever have before. My shop sent me home and I spent the last 2 days lying in bed sweating so heavily I became dehydrated and have been pumping myself with water as much as I can. I am back at work now because I need the money, but my fever is still at 99.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sweating has not stopped for a minute. I am still having trouble eating, and I am still very spooked by what I encountered. I hope that somebody listening to this show has an idea of what I did encounter, though. Eli immediately said Skinwalker the moment we hit it, but I am open-minded, but I would be lying to say if I was sure of anything in specific. Let me know what you guys think of this. I am dying to hear an outside opinion on this. It's still extremely fresh on my mind. It has only been 3 days since this happened. Thanks for your time. A few years back, my friends Jeff, Gabe, and I decided to take a hike in a secluded area we were not too familiar with. I was 16 at the time, and Jeff was 18, and I believe Gabe was around 19. We were all into photography, so we were hoping to get to the top of the mountain just as the sun was setting to get some really good shots. We turned on some really cool music and generally just relaxed on the way up, having a good time, making jokes and conversation. We saw a few groups of people on the way up, all of which warned us to get off the mountain before dusk, as bears and mountain lions were very prominent in the area, and it would not be a smart idea to hike too much longer after dark. We did not take them too seriously and continued up the mountain until we reached the summit and got our pictures. Unfortunately, they did not turn out that great, and since the trail was a loop, we decided to follow the loop in hopes of getting a better angle. What we failed to realize was that the loop was several miles long, and it would take us way beyond nightfall to get back down. By the time we had realized our mistake, it was unfortunately far too late to do anything about it. We were in the middle of the Colorado wilderness, with nothing to guide us but our phone flashlights. Eventually, my speaker died, and, as it did, all three of us immediately noticed a bizarre, almost surreal silence. At this point, we are more than just a little freaked out, and are beginning to panic. I decided to hold the small pocket knife I had on me. I put it in my fist, and it did give me a little comfort. The silence was short-lived and was broken within minutes by the sound of heavy boots on the gravel. A figure appeared over the hill. As it came closer into view, I noticed a few odd things about what at the time I thought was a man. He was walking in the pitch-black night without any source of light. He had a black bandana covering his lower face, and he was walking very slowly and deliberately. As he passed, I muttered inaudibly nervous, "Hey." He never responded, nor did he even glance in our direction. The night air was chilly, but I swear I felt it drop a few degrees when this person walked by us. We picked up our pace and did not dare to look back for several minutes. By the time we worked up the courage, he was already gone. We tried to explain it for each other's comfort, but we all knew that it was not quite that simple. By the time we were getting close to the bottom of the mountain, we had calmed down just a bit, but that did not last for too long. There was only one car in the parking lot, and it was ours, meaning there was no one else up on that mountain. We left in a rush, and still to this day I get goosebumps thinking about the ordeal. Thank you for sharing my story, Swamp Dweller, and I hope everybody here enjoyed it. I grew up in rural Oregon, with around 70 acres of wooded private property as my personal playground. By the time I was 16 years old, I'd spent countless hours exploring every foot I could, and have never experienced anything more unpleasant than poison oak and more than a few blackberry scratches. Oddly, there was one small portion of the property I had never explored. I could not really tell you why I had never gone to this little corner, but I just never did. It was like an unconscious choice to just never go there. There was an old trail that went there, but I don't know, I guess it just never came up. One afternoon, I got the itch to turn left and follow that trail, however. The day was bright and warm. Nothing was sketchy or untoward. However, within the first 50 feet of the trailhead, I felt an overwhelming need to stop in my tracks. It was like, as I stood there, I was stepping into a sticky mousetrap. My feet simply would not carry me any further. As I stood there, every hair on my body stood on end, and I felt sick to my stomach with dread. I spun in place, looking in every direction for whatever danger my whole body was telling me was present. The spot where I stood was a bit of a clearing in the tree. I had around 20 or so feet of total visibility in all directions, and further in some. There was nothing, not a bird or a bug. I've never felt such utter terror and desire to go full knees to chest for the hills. I made my way back to the trailhead as fast as I could possibly backpedal. And the second my feet left the trail, it all faded. My hair went back down, my stomach settled, and zero sense of unease. It was like stepping out of a room and closing the door. For years I wondered what kind of presence I had encountered. Many naysayers tried to tell me it was probably a cougar and it was just my sixth sense picking up on it. But I'm not buying it. Then, in talking with my parents one day, who used to wander that property when they were dating a few decades ago, I found out they had come across the remnants of an old homestead there. It had deteriorated to the point there was nothing left but the outline of a foundation and some old medicine bottles. I had a light bulb moment. It seems that maybe one of the homesteaders was still there, and I was trespassing. I've had short-lived moments of temptation where I thought about going back there and seeing if I could replicate the experience. In all honesty, though, whatever was there was way too dark for me to ever want to encounter it again. It seems best left alone. This experience I'm going to describe has taken a while for me to get together and write down. I have experienced a few paranormal things, but this is the craziest one of all of them. It takes place in Yosemite National Park in August of 2017 with my two best friends, Zach and Andrew. Zach had worked that summer as a parking agent at Glacier Point, and was familiar with the area. The employee housing he was given was a house in Wawona with 2 other guys. Andrew and I were visiting for the week and had each been to Yosemite before. One of the nights we decided to watch the sunset over Chilnwalna Falls. It was a nice hike, and Zach had done it before. The trail was about 4 miles to the top with about a 2,000-foot elevation gain. We brought food and decided to hike up and take a swim and eat at the pools on top of the falls. We set out a couple of hours before sunset. As we approached the top portion, we were about a half mile to the top of the falls, where a guy about our age, probably early 20s, ran up to us from bushes frantically asking for help. This guy said his friend had fallen 50 feet off a cliff and had a shattered femur. Zach was used to this after working in the park all summer. He had many injuries and was used to it. The man did not have cell reception, but I did, so I called 911 and reported the incident, requesting search and rescue. After a few minutes, we decided we wanted to walk and continue the hike after search and rescue assured us they would be there soon with a helicopter. We told the guy help was on the way and continued the next half mile up to the top of the falls. When we got there, it was a picture-perfect scene, a beautiful sunset as we swam and ate. When we got an amazing show, as we saw the helicopter land to pick up the injured guy we just encountered right below us. I am a private pilot and Air Force aviator, so I loved every second of watching the helicopter land on the mountainside. After the sunset, we began to hike down and past the spot with the injured guy, and search and rescue were taking care of him. We had a brief encounter with them. They thanked us for calling it in. It was now dark out and we continued the hike down. There was not much moonlight. It was dark, so we used our phones as flashlights to see the trail. This is where the story truly gets interesting. The top of the hike was switchbacks with a steep incline on the right and a steep decline on the left with shrubs and trees. It was too steep to hike down, hence the switchbacks. About 1 mile into the hike down, Zach was in front with a light. I was second, also shining my light, and Andrew was in the back. Zach was shining his light ahead and saw something sticking out from behind a tree. It was about 15 feet ahead of us, just off the right of the path, and instinctively shined the light at it. That is, whatever it was exposed itself from the tree and ran across the path, down to the left and down the steep grade. It ran on 2 feet, and resembled some sort of humanoid. It was a little shorter than us and very clearly had 2 arms and 2 legs, but it moved in an inhuman way. It kind of resembled a person. It had a head and its limbs appeared to be just skin, no clothes on at all. We all 3 saw it, and we stopped dead in our tracks. We continued shining the light to where it ran, down the left side of the mountain, but did not see anything after it ran down. We were terrified, none of us really knowing what to say because we had no idea what we had seen. The worst part was that we had another 3 miles to hike down and 1.5 miles from the trailhead to Zach's house, all while knowing that this creature could be stalking us and was near. Luckily, we made it to his house terrified and exhausted, but without harm. Whatever it was must have been as scared as we were. My question is, if anybody has ever had a similar experience in that area. I have done my research, and my best guess would be like a skinwalker or something like that, but it did not try to lure us into the forest with it, so I am unsure. We had a subsequent experience a couple of years later in Tioga Pass, right outside of the Tioga gate of the park. We were camping in a closed area in Tioga. In the middle of the night, I woke up to go pee, and before exiting the tent, I saw an orb about 5 feet in front of the tent, floating across with a bright light. I do not think it was a person because Zach, Andrew, and I all saw the orb floating across, and there was not anyone around us. Our friend Jackson was also in the tent, and in the morning he told us he felt rocks getting thrown at the tent all night, along with hearing footsteps near. Does anybody have any similar experiences? I would love to know. We all know what we saw, and we all know it was not human. I'm a 19-year-old male, tall but underweight, so not extraordinarily strong. One evening in the summer, I decided to go on a small hike, despite it raining. The trail was on a long road in the middle of nowhere. It is not super busy, but seeing cars every once in a while is not very weird. There is a small pull-off for parking across the street from this trail. It's probably able to fit like 10 cars. I park at the end of a lot, and I am the only one there, obviously because it is raining. Soon after walking, it starts to pour, but I can keep going because I am looking for something, unrelated to the story, but it was a working fountain in the middle of the woods. As soon as I find it, I held back because I am soaked. When I get out of the woods, there is a car parked next to mine. It is an older boxy car, late 70s or early 80s maybe. The thing is they pulled in backward to park, so their driver's side door is on my driver's side door, and they parked close to my car like a yard or two. I immediately think this is weird and start to panic, thinking they are probably attempting an abduction. I thought, what if I turned around and hiked for a bit, with the hope they would be gone after? But if they were kidnapping me, they already saw me, so my best bet is to go straight to the car. I remembered reading online that if you think someone is trying to abduct you, you should probably enter the passenger side door. But my car was crap, and often the key fob would only unlock the driver's side door, so I decided I could not risk it. I made it to the road, looked both ways, and for a split second, I decided to book it to the car. While repeatedly hitting the unlock button to assure it would open, I jumped in, clicked lock a bunch of times, got the key in the ignition, and began to get the heck out of there. Everything was slippery and cold because my hands were wet. I floored it out of there. As soon as I left, I stared in my rearview mirror, and not even 20 seconds go by, and the car leaves, going the opposite way thankfully. I don't know. Something just seemed really odd about the situation. It might not be the scariest story ever shared, but it made me feel really uncomfortable, and honestly I question very often what those people wanted to do, and why they parked so close to me in the middle of nowhere, for no reason. This is in the middle of nowhere, eastern Montana. This happened about 6 p.m. We were playing hide and seek with all my best friends and their siblings. We hear this loud screaming coming from the woods. So as smart people would do, we start hiking to find out what was making the noise. On our way up, we noticed that there were these 2 deer that were standing completely still, staring at us. They were scarily still. We even make a bunch of noise to try to get their attention and try to scare them away, but they don't budge. They keep looking directly up the mountain. We do not really think much of it. We keep going, and whatever it is still screaming absolutely bloody murder. My friend's older sister is calling back. Then, suddenly, it just stops. We keep going for a bit, and we eventually find mountain lion tracks. We all sit down, and we all have this feeling that something is watching us. So we close our eyes, and I told everyone to point to where the feeling is coming from. We all point to the same exact spot. Above us. My friend and I stay at that spot while her 2 other siblings go up a little further. They come back down to us and they say they saw the mountain lion. We decided it would probably be a smart idea to go back to the property. We begin to hike down, and the deer are still there. We figure it's because they knew the mountain lion was there. The next day we come back to where we were after being out for the entire day. My friend, her older sister, and I are all very tired. It was about 10 p.m.-ish. The older sister goes outside to pee outside of the trailer. This was in June, so it was still bright. She sprints back inside the trailer and tells my friend and me that there is something out there that ran toward her. We believe that she was making jokes. At around 11 p.m., my friend goes to sleep. I stayed up because I was not very tired. Sometime around 1 a.m., she wakes up to go to the bathroom. She goes outside the trailer and dead sprints back inside and tells me there is 100% something out there, and that whatever it was fast and big and ran toward her. The older sister wakes up my friend, telling me all of this information, and comes to the back of the trailer where we are. There are 4 motion sensor lights on the corner of our trailer, pointed at us, and this is important. We all were scared crapless in the trailer, and I'm lying on my side looking at the window. My friend is there looking out the opposite window. The curtains are closed, but I notice a lighting change. I tell the others what I saw because I don't believe they were paying fully attention. And about 10 seconds later, my friend says the light on my side went off. So now we know something is 100% out there, walking around our trailer, and we are terrified. My friend is wild and decides to go back to sleep for whatever reason. So, her older sister and I work up enough courage to move out to the front of the trailer. It is now probably 2 a.m. if I had to guess. We notice that the lights out front are also getting triggered. We are clueless about what we are supposed to do, so we lock the doors. We didn't find out till the morning that the locks don't work. We grab the biggest knives we can. We sit on the bed that is in the main room. There is a window not even an inch above the bed, so keep this in mind. Whatever was out there kept circling around until it stopped by the window and started tapping on the trailer and hitting it hard enough to shake the trailer. The older sister and I are almost in tears from fear at this point. It is easily around 3 a.m. at this point, and we hear my friend's grandfather coughing outside. The older sister is overly concerned for him, but I force her to stay inside because whatever is out there is not friendly. The coughing stops eventually. Next, we hear a very faint screaming from the woods, as whatever it is outside our trailer was still tapping and rubbing against it. So we knew it was not the mountain lion. Or is it? We eventually fall asleep at around 4:30 a.m., and a couple of hours later we investigate around the trailer and find deep imprints around our trailer that are way too big to be any animal that is out there. The same friend goes there quite often, and the last time they did, I did not tag along for obvious reasons. But something jumped on top of the trailer and was pacing back and forth and would run back and forth every so often. Also, sometimes stopping right over where they were laying. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true hiking horror stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton in the YouTube algorithm. If you're listening on iTunes or another podcast platform, be sure to give the show a 5-star rating as it really helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories wherever you go, from iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. And the best part is it's absolutely free and always will be. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a scary story from hiking or something else in the outdoors, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that truly help keep this show going on a daily basis. In the comments down below, I'd love to know what story tonight was your favorite. I'd probably have to say story number 3 was my personal favorite tonight. Interesting stuff and downright terrifying. I love to hike myself and have not had too many creepy experiences out there. Maybe the woods going silent a few times on me and the occasional feeling of being watched, but nothing too terrifying. The scariest thing I'd say that probably ever happened to me was running face to face with the mountain lion. But usually, as long as you respect nature, nature respects you.
First, let me introduce myself. My name is Dee, and one cool October morning I decided to take my wife, Joanne, camping. We spent the morning packing the supplies we would need. Once we had everything we needed, we locked up our house and drove about 15 minutes to our land out in Somerville, Georgia. Once we arrived and found a good spot, We didn't have much time to do what we needed, so I quickly unloaded the truck and asked Joanne to start assembling the tent while I get some firewood. As I approached the woods, I got a feeling that someone was watching me, so as soon as I chopped up enough wood, I began building and lighting the fire because the sun was setting quickly. Joanne had already had the tent up, so now we could relax. We sat around the fire roasting and eating hot dogs when I noticed the fire getting smaller and smaller, so I grabbed my headlight and machete and went to get more firewood. I walked inside the tree line about 15 feet and found some good dry wood, and as I was chopping, I heard what sounded like footsteps crunching in the leaves behind me. I quickly turned around to illuminate the area I heard it coming from, but I didn't see anything, so I tried my best to brush it off. I grabbed the wood I had cut and returned to camp. Joanne was ready to roast marshmallows, so I didn't tell her what I had just heard. I just built up the fire higher and sat down close to it, trying to warm back up. Once I got warm, I ate some s'mores with my wife and forgot all about it. We started to clean up our campsite and get ready for bed, when I realized I would need more firewood to stay warm until morning. So I returned to the wood line and immediately remembered the sounds I heard. So this time, I didn't enter the tree line. I just started cutting the wood that I could get to. When I had a good stack of wood, I reached down and collected it, and as I was standing back up, I caught a glimpse of an unnaturally dark object with reflective yellow and green eyes in the woods. I acted as though I didn't see anything, and I slowly walked back to the campsite where Joanne was already in the tent. I was placing the wood on the fire when I heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Joanne jumped out of the tent and asked, "Dee, what was that?" I told her not to worry. It was probably just a mountain lion, and it shouldn't bother us. So we went to bed thinking everything would be fine. God, we were wrong. I was awoken by Joanne shaking me. She whispered to me that she smells something dead, and she can hear something breathing loudly outside the tent. I no longer saw the warm glow of the fire, so I got worried. I grabbed my 9mm pistol slowly and sat up and unzipped the tent. Outside of the tent door about 40 feet ahead, I see a herd of deer staring at us. I could see every breath they took as they were blowing fog out of their noses because it was so cold. I yelled loudly to scare the deer away, and it worked. They all ran off. Well, except for one. It was slowly walking towards us. I could see it was a nice 12-pointer, but as he got closer, I noticed his coat was unusually dark and mangy. The smell of death got worse as the buck got closer. Then I noticed that his eyes were glowing yellow, and I didn't have my headlight on. That's when I knew something was wrong. I grabbed my headlight and pointed it towards the deer. That's when I saw that its skin was peeling off and hanging. I could see its skull through pieces in the meat. I knew there was no way this thing could be alive. The deer stopped walking, opened its mouth, and out came a scream that we had heard before. At this point, Joanne was crying. I told her to run to the truck, crank it up, and be ready for me to jump in, and I'll watch her back. She made it to the truck and cranked it up without the buck even moving, and then began to slowly walk towards me again. It seemed he was only after me. I aimed my pistol at the buck's head and pulled the trigger. I'm not sure I even hit it, because it was now charging towards me. I had 6 more rounds and I shot them all. It slowed the deer down, but at no way did it stop it. I had no way to defend myself. It was almost to my tent when Joanne crashed into it with the truck. I jumped in as fast as I could and we drove away, leaving everything we had behind. We came back later that day to get all of our belongings and see if what we still hit was still there. After taking 7 bullets and being hit by a 6,000-pound truck, there was no blood and no sign that anything was ever there. We haven't been camping since. This all took place when I was 14. It was a Saturday, and we were going camping in one of the more rural parts of Jamaica. I won't name the place for privacy reasons, but first, here's some background. As I said, I'm 14, about 5'3", and a medium frame build. In other words, I was a big kid. Anyway, back to the story. The campsite that we were going to was about an hour and a half worth of driving. When we get there, We get our stuff from the truck and started hiking to find a good spot. We come across a nice, calm, crisp-looking stream, so we decide to stop here and get some dinner right away. About 2 hours later, we pack up and start again. By now, it's about 4:30 p.m. We finally find a good enough spot to set up. All of a sudden, we pick up this awful, pungent stench. It honestly smelled like expired sour cream and rotten eggs mixed in a toilet that hadn't been cleaned for 6 years and left in the sun. And it was close. I felt chills go down my spine and a wave of dread rushed over me when I heard the shrillest, most ear-piercing screech I had ever heard in my life. I grabbed the sawed-off double-barrel shotgun and ran inside the tent. I actually fell asleep quickly, despite it only being 6 p.m. At about 2 a.m., I had awoken to the sound of a branch snapping, and to make matters worse, I had to use the bathroom. Me being a horror movie enthusiast knew all too well what not to do in situations like these. I laid still with the double barrel in my hand, ready to fire it if it came to the test. Fast forward about 10 minutes later when I heard my uncle scream. I quickly woke my dad up, who was sleeping next to me, and slowly walked out there to see what was going on. At first I was thinking he was just playing a trick on us. Nothing could have ever prepared me for what I saw. This thing was at least 8 feet tall. It had the smell I described earlier. It had 2 horns sticking out of its head, and it stood on 2 awfully man-like legs. I thought I was in hell looking at the devil himself. Within no more than a second or two, I fired a round into its leg. It jolted back, so human-like. A little too human-like. Then it happened. This thing turned around and acknowledged us, almost as if it wanted to speak. And it did. I don't remember exactly what it said, but it spoke in a deep, raspy, manly voice. I remember it having hellish, red-gleaming eyes that stared through my soul. I shot at it again, this time the back of its disgusting devil-like back covered with white, dirty, disgusting-looking fur. About 5 seconds or so, the thing ran off into the woods, leaving a trail of blood. I looked over at my uncle. He was almost in tears, and as for my dad, he was just frozen. I don't know what the hell this thing was, and I don't know how I wasn't crying. We all stayed up in one tent packing our stuff, planning to book it back to the truck as soon as the sun came up. After about 7 hours, the sun finally came up and we did what we planned to do. When we got to the truck, we started it and drove out of there like a bat out of hell. On the ride home, we didn't say a word, nor did we when we got home. You'd think the story ends here. Well, not all fairy tales have happy endings. About 2 weeks later, we went down to the countryside to camp with my aunt, uncle, and cousins. This drive was about 3 hours away from where we lived, so we were going to spend the night with them. Obviously, that was our intention anyway. When we get there, we see them all standing on the front patio waiting for us with a look of joy on their faces. Now, to describe the place, it was about 5 acres of empty woodland area, but it had great lighting around the house from the LED solar-powered lights. Anyway, after about 10 minutes of talking and catching up, we all go inside and make our way to the bathroom to freshen up. When I'm finished, I get out and make my way to the room I'm staying in, and 2 of my cousins, Brian and Mario, out of the 6, are in the room playing Forza Horizon 4 on the PS4. When it's about 10 p.m., I decide I'm going to bed. I said my goodnights and went up to my room. It was dark, but I didn't think to turn on the light. I just went straight to bed and tucked in. I heard the door open, but I just brushed it off as my cousins. About 2 hours later, Mario comes in, turns on the light, and screams. I will never forget the look on his face when I asked what's wrong. He looked as though if he had just killed someone accidentally. It was almost as if he wanted to say oops and started raging. He was in total awe. It was the thing from earlier. It just walked over to the open window, which was about 2 stories off the ground, made its way down, and walked away into the woods as if nothing had ever happened. It moved so human-like, so disgusting, so purposely. When everyone ran up to us and asked what had happened, We all finished them telling the story. Brian simply said one word: Goatman. Fortunately, this was the last time I personally had an experience with this creature, and I hope I never will again. But sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I turned on the light, or if Mario didn't come in when he did, or if he had laid down next to this thing without bothering to turn the light. I'm glad I don't know. One night last year during the fall, I was camping on my property with my wife. It's all in a secluded forest on a private lake in Georgia, so we don't have any neighbors within 30 miles. After I gathered some firewood from some small trees that I had cut down, I heard this noise coming from the west side, from where I was standing. I wasn't skeptical about it at first, because it came from a great distance, as it was a low echo. I went back to the campfire, and sometime around an hour later, we did some fishing for catfish while the moon was full. I heard the noise again, and it was closer to us this time, but possibly about 1,000 yards away. We don't have many bears in this part of Georgia, if any. I've heard many recordings of Bigfoot on YouTube, but this thing sounded nothing like that. It was a monstrous sound like a raging gorilla. Whatever it was, it sounded a lot bigger than a man. My wife heard it too. We got too scared to stay any longer, so we packed up and headed back to the house. The next day, sometime in the afternoon, I went back to our camping location carrying my .30-30 rifle and walked a little over 1,000 yards toward the sound that we had heard last night. I came upon a muddy bank near the lake and saw these gigantic footprints. They were almost like a man's foot, but with bladed toes. The next thing I did was put my foot beside one of the footprints to measure it. My shoe size is 12, but the footprints were about 6 inches wider and 3 inches longer. What could it be? Let me know what you think this thing was, please. So before I get into this story, there are a few things I would like to clear up. First, this story takes place in Altamont, Tennessee, in mid-July of 2018. Second, I was in the Boy Scouts at the time. Third, I have some friends that I will be referring to in this story. Their names are Brad, Steve, Xavier, and Paul, respectively. 4, we were grouped in tents that had 2 each inside. I was in a tent with Steve, so Brad and Xavier were sharing a tent, and Paul was sharing a tent with somebody I can't recall. I was at a summer camp for 8 days, but I only spent 6 days at the camp, as it was a day's drive up and back. The first few days were pretty normal, honestly, but it was the night of the 3rd day when I couldn't sleep on account of the awful tents, which hardly closed and seemed to be infested with insects and arachnids of every kind. So I was awake for most of the night, listening to the sounds of the Tennessee woods, until I noticed some peculiar noises which didn't seem normal. I first noticed strange noises at around 1 a.m., 1 hour after lights out. First, it sounded like footsteps, but as time went on, I started to hear what sounded like whispering. I couldn't make out what it was saying, because it was barely audible. I was pretty shaken up, but eventually the noises quieted down and I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I told Steve about it, and we both shrugged it off, although at that point I wasn't sure I had been dreaming or if I was awake. I forgot about it until that night shortly before lights out, when I remembered and told Brad, Xavier, and Paul. Even though I was dreading it, of course, I would have to go to sleep eventually. When I made my way to my tent, I unsurprisingly couldn't fall asleep, but not because of the noises. I couldn't sleep because I had what seemed like 6 billion bugs in my tent. At about 12:30 to 1 a.m., the noises started, this time more loud and intense. The noises started with footsteps, but the footsteps quickly evolved into voices themselves. Not whispers, but full volume talking and possibly even yelling at one point. Then the sounds morphed into chirping and squeaking. At one point I even heard what sounded like a medieval battle horn, like in the Narnia movies. Eventually, I grew tired of cowering in my tent and decided to go check out what the noises could be. I went down to the bathrooms, which were about 200 feet away and down a hill from my tent. When I got to the bathroom, I realized the squeaking noises seemed to be coming from a leaky old house, which was a huge relief. I relieved myself and went back to my tent. I laid down and it appeared that the noises had stopped, but of course, that was only temporary. When the noises started up again, I called out in a slightly hushed tone, thinking it was somebody playing a prank. It was about 2:30 to 3 a.m. at this point when my friend Paul responded to my call and came over to my tent. Paul said that he had been up for a while because of the bugs in his tent when he noticed the noises too. He had been up for about 30 minutes when he heard me and came over to my tent. Paul and I hung out in Steve and I's tent for a while. Steve slept through the entire night, even with Paul and I trying to wake him up. While we were in the tent, the noises would stop and start repeatedly, alternating every 10 minutes or so. While Paul and I were in my tent, with Steve sleeping next to us in the tent, we noticed that the footsteps were getting increasingly closer and louder. The footsteps were so much that it sounded like they were right outside our tent. We figured it was another kid who was in the tent nearby named Eddie. He may have been sleepwalking because he was known to do that sometimes. We called out to Eddie asking if he was alright. There was no answer though. We shrugged it off and continued talking. Eventually Paul got tired and returned to his tent at about 4 a.m. Honestly, at this point, I decided I would try to get some sleep too. I had been laying down for all of 10 minutes when the noises started up, and I realized I would not be getting any sleep that night, and decided to walk around the camp and try to find the source of these noises. I did not find anything. However, I did walk by Brad and Xavier's tent. I decided to see if they were awake by whispering into the side of their tent. Brad was awake, Xavier was not. I asked Brad if he had heard the noises, which he said he had. Brad had said he was up listening to the noises for about an hour when I came over. I told Brad to keep his ears open for any more weird noises and went back to my tent. About 20 minutes later, I started to hear the noises start up again. I decided to wait a few minutes to see if the noises would stop. The noises did not stop. I decided to go check around the campsite again. This time, though, I went to Brad and Xavier's tent first to recruit them to help me check. When I got over there, both Brad and Xavier were awake. It was sometime between 5:30 and 6 a.m., so Xavier and Brad came out of their tent and walked with me around the campsite. We had checked the entire area and were about to return to our tents. We happened to be walking by the end of a huge rectangular clearing behind our campsite when we saw a strange animal at the other end of it. It was no more than 200 feet away if I had to guess. The thing looked like it was prone. It was completely still, just watching us. We didn't know what it was, so we started walking toward it. When it realized we were coming closer, it got up, and this is when we realized that we weren't looking at any ordinary animal. This thing was like 4 feet tall and humanoid, with a hunched posture and huge glowing orange eyes about the size of tennis balls. Its head appeared to be pushed into its torso, giving it an appearance similar to that of the depictions of the Mothman. When it got up, it started hobbling away towards a large ditch. As we got closer, it became more frantic and started to move faster. By the time we got there, it was long gone and the ditch was empty. We checked the area in which it had been and found nothing of importance. Though, hilariously, we did find an empty bag of Planters peanuts about 10 feet away from where the creature had been. I have no idea what we saw that night, but I am sure we saw something we can all agree on that is not natural. I spent hours searching for anything about the creature we saw, but have not found any evidence of this creature's existence online. I am sending in this story in hopes that it will be spread around, and eventually I will have an answer for what we saw that night. I want to start off by saying that hindsight is a B word. And I know now, looking back at all the things I did wrong, and how things could have turned out much better if I had just listened to my gut. But anyways, this situation takes place quite a few years back when I was in Boy Scouts. My troop had announced that summer that we were going to go to a new camp, and that camp would be Camp Woodruff. It's a camp in Georgia, and you can look it up online if you can't take my word for it. My grandpa was an Eagle Scout back in his day, and he was a troop leader now. Since he was going, I decided I would too, because I wanted to spend more time with my grandfather. My grandma had passed away about a year prior. The only problem is, I didn't know how to do summer camp, as I've never attended one before. When I got there, I realized this was going to suck majorly. The tents my troop were staying in were full of non-lethal forest spiders, and, for an arachnophobe like me, it was hell on earth. The goal of being here was to earn badges for your sash and bond with your fellow scouts, which is a great way for young men to gather some special skills and have some fun. But I can't find the joy in tying knots when I didn't even like scouting in the first place. However, later on in the week, we would be going to an independent horse ranch, and they would allow us scouts who wanted to go on a trail on a horse. Horse riding day came, and I was extremely excited, especially because I got to ride near the front with the rancher tour guide. His name was Trent, and he was so cool to my 17-year-old mind. I have always loved and appreciated horses, as it was on their backs America was built before machines. The horse is a proud and noble animal that has always been by humans and most likely always will be. So as we were going along the trail, Trent told us to stop and let the horses drink a bit from an upcoming stream. Trent let his horse take his swigs of water, and when it was time for my horse, a snake of some kind wriggled in the stream, causing my horse to go bat crap crazy and buck me off. Here is where hindsight comes in. After I fell off my horse, my gut told me to stop and wait for the expert to calm the horse down. But I didn't want to wait on the ground with the snake. I rolled over and ended up cuddling the eviscerated remains of some poor buck or something. There was blood all over my neck, shirt, and even on my legs. I started to freak out even more and ran off a bit further down the trail. But in my panic, I lost my footing and fell down the side of a hill, which was about 9 feet or so. I felt so much pain in my hip because I landed sideways. When Trent and the rest of the troop saw where I was, they asked if I was okay, and I replied, "I'm not dead, just really scared." "Don't worry. Eventually the trail goes back down to the other side of this hill and curves around to you. Just wait there for us and you'll be fine." I heard the words Trent said, but the only thing I could think of was that carcass I ever so carelessly rolled into. I looked down at the back of my legs. I had a cut from my tumble down the hill. But I sat there and waited, and after about 15 minutes I started to hear screaming. It was weird though, because it sounded like I was screaming, which sadly was high-pitched and impossible to mimic. At first, I thought it was the rest of my troop who had come to mock me for causing my own literal downfall. But after I looked around, I realized it was not them. Otherwise, I would have heard the horses or their talking and laughing. I sat in silence and heard something that still haunts my nightmares. In my own voice, I heard, "I'm really dead." This person or thing had twisted my own words around into a horrifying sentence. I looked around and saw this semi-hollow tree that looked like it was clinging on to the ground for dear life not to fall over. I dragged myself over to the tree and tried my best to conceal myself inside. I stayed still and concentrated all my remaining energy into not moving. I heard heavy movements outside the tree. I smelled the stench of copper, and then the smell of blood. Whatever was creeping around outside my hiding space was breathing heavily and screeching this ear-deafening scream. I wanted to cry, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I almost did. I silenced my breathing inside my shirt and prayed to God that whatever this thing was, it wouldn't find me. I stayed like this for who knows how many minutes. That felt like forever until I looked upon my shoulder and saw another freaking spider. I forgot my situation, and I screamed and ran outside the tree, where I kept running on pure adrenaline until I ran into another rancher that came from the stables to look for me when Trent radioed to them about my location. They heard the scream and assumed it was me. I tried my best to tell them about the thing that was lurking around here, but all that came out was a mumbled jumble of words. She helped me onto her horse, and she took me back to the barn where I got the blood hosed off of my leg and bandaged up. I tried to tell the few other adults what had happened, but they marked it up as hysteria and hallucinations from a panic attack. I didn't sleep for the last 3 nights that we were there, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever return to the woods of Georgia, ever again, because I've done my research and I think that creature that antagonized me was a Wendigo.
So, for a little bit of backstory, you can call me Jay and I am 19. This all happened on July 3rd, 2020. I live in a rural area on the East Coast. My house is surrounded by forest and a bit of swampy patch. Anyway, on to my story. My friend's mom invited me over for a small pre-4th of July fireworks show at their house. It was around 9:30, and I had just finished dinner, so my mom and I were both going over. I threw some flip-flops on and grabbed a drink and my flashlight and headed out the door. I unhooked the bike from the chain and pushed it down into the driveway. I turned it around and biked down the dark tree-covered back road towards his house. As I rode, holding my flashlight in one hand and steering with the other, I began hearing something, like somebody whispering in my ear. I looked over and didn't seem to see anything. I could not understand what this thing was trying to say, but as I got further down the road, I heard more of these whispers coming from my left, and then to my right. The whispers grew louder and louder. My mind starts to hurt from hearing all the whispers around me. Then, something stopped my heart right there. A scream from in the woods way off in the distance, like some woman getting murdered. It made me want to stop, but I couldn't, so I kept pedaling harder. But as I pedaled harder, I heard the screaming getting closer and closer as it started to follow me. Then I heard something else from behind me as well. It sounds like somebody running and laughing psychotically, like a murderer would. I pedaled even harder and faster. My legs started to cramp, but I didn't care. I wanted to get out of the trees and into an open area. I could not tell if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I felt like I was so much further away from the opening than it was before. So I just kept on pedaling as I saw a car go down the street. I was trying to get closer to it so I could get into the light. I kept going with the full intent of getting away from whatever was happening. As I neared the opening finally, I heard the whisper again in my ear. It felt like something breathing against my ear as it spoke a few words that I finally understood.
Protect your shadow.
It spoke as I felt this icy cold breath brush my cheeks. I soon arrived there in probably about 9 minutes, which I could have been there a whole lot later if I hadn't been dealing with whatever that was. I pulled in, and we had a good time lighting off fireworks, big bangs, and sprayers, and all the fun things you could possibly do with a fireworks kit. But something happened while I was there. Something had happened between my friend and his little brother, where it ended up with his little brother on the ground crying and the big brother getting backhanded by his dad. As soon as the backhand hit, I heard the snap of a finger by my ear, and I turned around and there was nobody there. The voice whispered again, "The shadow is now ours. Thank you for the treasure." I froze in that split second and thought, what's happening right now? Like, what the heck? I turned around to see the little brother get up and sit in a chair and have an ice pack on his cheek. As the night went on, I heard a whipping in the slight breeze. Then I heard what sounded like a cracking off in the woods. I snapped my head to the right to look out into the open farm pasture. As the full moon lit up the ground a bit, I saw a shadow outline of something within the tree line. It started running towards me as I fell back into the chair, behind me as I got closer to the fire we were sitting around. It got right in front of me as I sat and staring into this thing's red eyes. The feeling of dread and fear took over me. I did not know what to say. I did not want to ask them if they saw it too, because then they might think I was crazy. But here I was, staring at this thing straight in its eyes.
"We're not here to harm you. We are here to harvest the shadows."
It spoke in a whisper, right in my ear again. I stood up and walked towards the shadow, and as soon as I got to where it stood, it vanished into thin air. I jumped back and looked back around trying to figure out where it went. I looked over to my right in the doorway, the barn. The shadow made the motion of, "Come here." I looked at them and told them I was going to go to the bathroom. so I walked to the barn and peeked inside of it. I heard the pig squeal a little as I felt a cold breeze blast into me. I looked down the walkway of the barn and heard something creak above me. I looked up and there was a shadow crouched on a beam above me, looking almost like a Spider-Man type creature. It had a weird posture. I nearly fell, trying to back out of there, freaking out. It jumped down in front of me, the impact making no noise at all. I stumbled back, falling on my ass. I back up and my back hits the barn door. It slowly walked towards me and crouches in front of me and holds out its hand. In its hand sat a dark version of my friend.
His shadow. What are you doing with it?
I had no idea if this thing could hear me. It made a small sighing noise as I saw something like a mouth form on this thing. Its yellow teeth and red eyes were absolutely terrifying me. It stares at me as it holds out the small version of my friend. It smiles and hands me the small figure and I look at it. It gave a small chuckle and vanished again. I slowly begin to stand up as the light slowly starts to flicker on and off in the barn. I start looking around, scared out of my mind. I hear laughter all around me and then something goes by flying. I run to the door and try to open it. The door would not open though, as I turned and looked as the light shut off and then it began to flicker like a strobe light would. As I looked down to the big barn doors in front of the tractor, sitting on the tractor was that shadow person. It stood up and jumped down from the tractor, walking towards me. With every flicker, it got closer and closer to me. It got right up into my face and blew a huge breath of cold, freezing air into my face as I grabbed the doorknob and opened it as I ran through the door, slamming it. I was terrified of what had happened. I had heard a giant bang above me as a firework went off. I slowly walked back to the fire. My heart was beating like a bass drum, and my face was paler than an albino. I sat down in my chair and watched the fireworks go off, hearing them explode. And as they explode, they light up the field a little bit, and I keep thinking I see that shadow out of the corner of my eye. As we winded down for the night, sometime around midnight, we went in and got a ride from my friend's dad in his truck. As we rode back to my place, I got a headache that was pounding in my head constantly. I looked over. Sitting across from me was the shadow. It gave me the motion to shush, and I did. I just rode in the truck until we got back, and I got out and unloaded my bike from the bed of the truck and locked it back up on the porch. I went into the house and told my parents about all the fireworks, and they were happy to hear it. I did not say a word about anything else that I encountered, because I did not want to end up in a psych ward. So I just went upstairs and laid down. As I laid in bed, the shadow sat at the edge of my bed and looked at me.
Keep hold of your friend's shadow, or else you'll pay the consequences.
And with that, it snapped its fingers and disappeared. And with that, I haven't seen it till this day. I still to this day have no idea what it was. I don't know if it was a demon or a poltergeist, but whatever it was could have killed me or taken my body over or whatever. But it seemed like it was playing games with me. I still have that shadowy statue in my room, put away somewhere. I know if I'll need it, I'll be able to find it again. I still want to know what it was, but I doubt I want to know. This thing terrified me more than whatever I had to deal with months ago. The unknown is truly unknown, and is something we might never understand. You can call me Brent. Some background information on this story is that it took place around November 20th of 2020 in a small town in Virginia. It all began on the ride from point A to point B. Point B is about a 4-hour drive from my house. On the way there, I was talking to my uncle about cryptids and how the mountain range we were hunting in was known for sightings. Some may be real and some may not be so true. It's not really my place to say if it is or isn't, but that was all going to change the next day. At the time, I was 17 years old and we were deer hunting. We had soon gotten to our campground and set up the trucks and campers. Once we were all set up, we grabbed our rifles and headed to our spot. It was my first time in this part of the woods, so I had no spot in particular. So it was just me, my grandfather, who you can call N, and my uncle, who you can call NC, and my little cousin, who you can call NS. We had driven out to some spots to check out, but at one of these spots there was a corpse of a doe that was mutilated and shredded to bits. The range was known for bears, but there were no bear in this area. We had thought maybe it was just coyotes or other scavengers, so I brushed it off. I soon decided to break away and walk about 4 miles north to this one spot that my uncle decided to talk about. I carried my Winchester 30-30 rifle and walkie-talkie. As I branched off, everything was like a nature walk in the range. Birds chirping, insects buzzing, and the wind whistling. It was serene and nice. I decided to take a spot in a valley that had a decent view. A couple of hours passed by and there was nothing really in sight. I called over the walkie-talkie and stated that I was heading back. On the way back there were tracks from a deer in some mud that was not too far away from me. I continued around and followed these tracks. I put a round in the chamber just in case. Maybe if I had seen it, I would just get a quick shot at it. I got about halfway back to where I was supposed to be when I saw a head poke out from behind the tree. It was a ragged-looking 6-point buck. I slowly pulled the rifle up, and in the scope was that buck, but something was different. Its body looked as if the deer was, well, something from a cheap zombie movie. At the time, I was just reading about a disease going around which made deer look and act very different. I dropped the sight when it took off into the brush, but it came off as odd because it stopped and had its antlers peered over the small pines. I called back over and told my uncle and told him that I had seen a buck and described its features. He saved me from just hurrying up and getting back due to my distance and the sun setting. I had gotten back to him in the truck. We made our way back to the camp, and that night, everything seemed usual and normal. I had soon gotten to sleep at around 12 Eastern Time. The next morning I woke up in a splitting headache, and thought as if somebody was watching me during the night. We had all suited up and stepped out of the camper to see tracks around our site. But it was not only one set, it were multiple sets. But it looked like it was going from human to deer and vice versa. We decided to head back out to the spots we took the previous day, but this time it was just me and my uncle since he wanted to see the spot I had taken. Then, I showed him the slot where the tracks were. He had just told me to be aware and to call him over on the walkie if anything was weird. He headed back to his original spot, and I changed spots. I went about a mile east of my position. I was now sitting on the downslope of a valley with a stream running through it. An hour or so passed by with nothing happening. I then heard a set of steps closing near me, but it was more like a person walking on the leaves and not like an animal on all fours. I called over the walkie-talkie to see if my uncle was the one who somehow was making it to my position. He stated that he wasn't, but to be on high alert since hunters are out here. But as he was speaking, a loud crash came from near me, as if someone had thrown a giant rock into the tree beside me. My instinct was to kick around into the chamber and send a warning shot. Once fired, the steps sprinted off and faded away, but not as far as I would think. They stopped about 75 feet, and then they looked at me. I could just feel this sensation of being stared at. My uncle called over and told me to get back ASAP since he heard the crash and the gunfire. I made my way up to the incline and put a new round into the chamber. As I start to see the crest, I noticed the same 6-point deer standing there staring at me with these dark black eyes, empty, as if they were just bottomless pits. It had shown itself when it stood up with the bones cracking and claws emerging from its skin. At this point, the body was mutilated and still changing. I send another round into it. I get it in the side, and it lets out a deafening screech. I make a break for the path. I could hear it on the pathway gaining on me as I was slowing. I made it to where the woodline breaks to see my uncle taking a form as if he were waiting to shoot the thing behind me. As I get closer, I turn around to see nothing. I explained what had happened, and he in all no doubt believed me. He had stated that this wasn't the first time he had had odd things happen to him while in these woods. He stated that he had an encounter when he was my age with my grandfather. We soon picked up the pace and packed up everything and got into the truck. We got inside and sped out of there. I hope this piques your interest, and I can hopefully figure out what was living in the mountain ranges of Virginia. I will never visit those parts again. You couldn't pay me to. If you believe my encounter, thank you, because it has taken a lot to bring this out into the world. If you do not believe me, then there are other stories on this page that still make you think that I'm not lying. Thank you, Swamp Dweller, again. Your stories help me see that I'm not losing my mind. My name is Brent, and I will soon ask my uncle if he is fine with sharing the other stories of his. Sorry to interrupt these stories, Swamp Folk, but I just need to take a quick minute to say thank you to today's sponsor, Manly Band. Guys, for the better part of our lives, our better halves have been fantasizing about the perfect wedding ring. Cut, clarity, carat, color, you name it. But for us, we're not so picky most of the time. I've had a hard time finding the perfect ring and one that fits my style. Honestly, going to stores is just so stressful most of the time. No worries though. No more of that. Manly Band is here to rescue from an otherwise hellish band buying experience. Manly Bands offers your hand the freedom to look how you want it in just about every type of earthly material imaginable. I chose the Narrator for simple and obvious reasons. I really enjoy how it looks and it just fits what I do. To get started, order the Manly Ring Sizer from Manly Bands to ensure that your ring will fit perfectly during work and play. Once you know your size, it's time for the fun part. Manly Bands has an insane selection of materials to choose from. Gold, wood, antler, steel, dinosaur bone, and even the meteorites that killed them. You can also choose from one of Manly Band's curated collections like the Jack Daniel's Whiskey Barrel Collection. Once you've selected your band, Manly Band offers free shipping worldwide, a 30-day exchange policy, and a free warranty. While there might be a 50% chance of your marriage working out, there's a 100% chance that you're going to love your band. To order your Manly Band and get 21% off, plus a free silicone ring, go to manlybands.com/swamped. That's manlybands.com/swamped for 21% off. Manly Band, the best damn rings, period. Now, back to the stories. Hi, Swamp Dweller. I've been a fan for a long time, and I've been wanting to share some stories with you. This story takes place in southeastern Kentucky, and is told by my father, who used to be an avid hunter when I was younger. He and his friend would go hunting almost every weekend. They would mostly hunt deer and go to various hunting grounds around the area. They would go very early in the morning, so early that the sun would not even be out yet. This morning was not any different, only this time my dad and his friend decided to split up for a better chance at grabbing a deer, which is nothing they hadn't done before. Neither one of them was in a deer stand, just regular camo and get up for hunting deer. This was also during a time when cell phones were not very common. This will be important for later. So if one of them shot, the other would follow the sound of the shot and catch up. They never went too far from one another. On this day, they got to the woods and went their separate ways. My dad has a flashlight with him to help him see where he's going. Once he found a good enough spot by a large tree, he fixed himself there, loaded up his rifle, and turned his flashlight off. He began to wait. It was so dark that he could barely see in front of his face. After what seemed like an hour, my dad noticed that it was extremely quiet. He was straining his ears to hear anything. Then out of nowhere, and only a few feet in front of him, came a very low and guttural growl like he had never heard before. The hair stood up all over his body, and all he could do was freeze. He said the growl was deeper than anything that he had ever heard before. He has been hunting in the woods for years, and has come across bears, bobcats, coyotes, and other predators of the like, but nothing has ever come close to this type of growl. He says this thing was very large easily from the sound of it. He says the scariest thing about this growl is that he never heard the creature coming, and he never heard it leave. He sat there frozen, not knowing what to do. He was afraid that if he moved, He might come off as a threat to whatever this thing was. So he sat there, waiting. He waited until the sun rose just enough that he could see all around him. There were never any tricks or any signs that anything had been there. It was October, though there were plenty of leaves and sticks on the ground, but there was only silence. My dad eventually caught up with his friend and they left. Since that day, my dad went hunting a few more times but then stopped completely. It's been about 20 years since then, but he still gets chills when telling this story. If you know my dad, you know that this is a very straightforward man, a no BS type of person. He does not believe in ghosts or cryptids or anything of the such, so it's super creepy to listen to him tell this story. Hi Swamp Dweller, thanks for sharing my story. This probably isn't the most dramatic story, but it was certainly very strange when it happened. So I used to live in a small town with an upscale downtown area. My sister at the time worked as a journalist at a local paper, and so found out some interesting historical events. One event is that the entire family that was nearby where we lived had drowned in a nearby pond, located in the center of an orange grove, because of some sort of freak accident. The cemetery where the family's gravestone was located was very close to the downtown area. So, my sister and I have always had a casual interest in the supernatural. Nothing major. When my sister suggested we visit the cemetery, I was all in. There were two graves that were of particular interest to us. One being that of the drowned family, and the other being a very old marker near the center of the cemetery that simply read, Mother. So, one night we ready ourselves for a bit of spooky fun and head out for the cemetery. It's a quiet town, so the cemetery is always open. We enter and begin heading towards the center of the cemetery. The path we took led us beneath some lights. I noticed one flickering as we passed under it, and then stopped. I did not think much of it. We arrived at the headstone of the family that had drowned, and we were just kind of quietly looking around when I heard a distinct growl. I stopped and looked for the source. Nothing behind any tree or other headstones were nearby, and nothing that I could see with my flashlight was further away. I did not mention it, and my sister did not seem to indicate that she ever heard it, so we moved on. We finally came to Mother's headstone, and once again quietly just looked around for a bit. Again I heard that growl, and I find no source of where it could be coming from. So I finally asked my sister if she had heard it. She said yes, but didn't want to freak me out. Talking about it later, we both agreed that the quality of the sound of the growl was strange, like it had been inside of your head, but we weren't certain. So, we decided we had overstayed our welcome and went to leave. On the way out, the same light flickered again as we walked under it. I made sure to say out loud that we were sorry for imposing, and we meant no harm and were only curious. But to be safe, I also said firmly that nothing in that cemetery was to follow us home. And that's it. Nothing very climactic, but also a very unnerving time. I've had some strange experiences I might share in the future as well. Hey Swamp Dweller, huge fan of your show. I listen to your episodes every night. They really help me fall asleep. Since I'm a fan of your show, I figured that I would share a story with you. So this story didn't happen to me, but to my older sister, who I will call Evie for privacy reasons. So, this happened in December of 2020. My sister was in Japan for a year teaching English for 2019. She came back home in January 2020 and was going back to Japan in March to teach English for 3 years. But when COVID-19 hit, she was unable to do that and had to stay home and try to find work here in the US. One day, Evie decided to take her long-haired German Shepherd Sheba for a walk. Keep in mind, we live in a very rural area, but there are still houses around not too far from us. As she was walking, my sister was about to put her headphones in to listen to your podcast and was passing this new house that someone builds in, I think, December or something like that. We only met the guy once, and he seemed nice enough, but we don't normally talk to strangers. A lot of the times, the neighbors prefer to be left alone anyway. As she was passing the driveway of the house and was about to play your podcast, she heard someone running, like full-on sprinting towards her. She turns around and sees this heavy guy running down the driveway towards her. She began to walk faster and get past the driveway. She was ready to scream at the top of her lungs in case the guy was after her. After a minute of walking, Evie turns around and sees this guy standing at the edge of the driveway, just looking at her with his mouth half open. She later told me that there was no expression on his face. No anger, lust, just nothing at all. It was completely blank. She kept walking, looking forward. As she walked, she could see and feel that his eyes were on her. She turned to walk up this hill, and out of the corner of her eye, she could see him watching her still. After a few more minutes of walking, Evie stopped and called our dad to pick her up. When they drove past the house, the guy was nowhere to be found. The weirdest thing about this story is that the guy isn't even the owner of the house. Hell, she had never even seen this guy before in her entire life, which just makes it even more scary thinking that this is just some random guy sitting on somebody's property, doing God knows what. So that's the story. I'm sorry if it's not long, or even terribly scary, but I figured I would share it since I really love your show and I do plan to submit more stories. Thanks again, and if you decide to share this story, be safe out there, everyone. And not just from COVID, but from people who have ill intent on others.
So this just happened 2 nights ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. I live in Wisconsin, not too far from Milwaukee, about an hour north, more farmlands area. I can't lie, I am an avid marijuana user, so to be blunt, my fiance and I were what we call burn cruising. So we had the windows partly open, as it's winter, and we do not want a hotbox in case we get pulled over. We're passing a house listening to music. I take a hit and turn and see a house. And as I focus on the small part of the roof that comes out of an odd place like the second floor just below a window, I see what looks like a dish. Behind it, however, I see something else. It turns its head and immediately faces me, as if it sensed me seeing it that briefly. It had big, black eyes like nothing was there. But there clearly was. I was so focused on the eyes for the moment that I was looking at it. I then turned my head, rolled up my window, and didn't say anything. We were on our way back, and took the same route we cruised out. I hadn't said anything to my fiance, but as we got closer and I realized we'd be taking the same way back, I had to, and I wasn't scared, but couldn't stop tearing up. As we passed the house, I pointed it out, but couldn't look. My fiance said there was no dish whatsoever, so whatever I saw was much larger than I had originally assumed. Probably more in the realm of 7 feet. I feel like I was not supposed to see it, because it was gone when we passed coming back. I grew up in a small town in England that had a lot of history. The town had a 900-year-old castle, a 500-year-old bookstore, multiple 250-plus-year-old hotels, and even the ruins of a monastery that dated back over 1,000 years. Needless to say, the town has seen a lot. By contrast, my primary, or elementary to Americans, school building was quite new, pre-World War I at the oldest. To give you an idea of the layout of the main building, it had a small entryway that leads to a hallway that had no windows to the playground on one side, and 3 classrooms to the right side. At the end of the hallway was the teacher's lounge and offices. The windows that this old building did have were unusually high up, so if you wanted to look out or in, someone would have to stand on a chair. That part is an important part that's going to happen later. It was a nice school, but sadly was scheduled to be demolished, and we were to move to a new building after only my first year there. A mixture of location, student numbers, and structure quality, if I remember correctly. There were a few incidents and stories from the school, but this will focus on what happened to me. A simple and almost cliché incident was my first one. I and my friend were alone in our classroom one day because we had to clean a mess we made, as little kids do, and jabbering on about soccer. No doubt, knowing us when we heard the unmistakable sound on the classroom door opening and closing. We instinctively turned to see no one there. Nobody had come in, and the window on the door showed no one on the other side. I suppose someone could have jumped to the side, but we were close enough to the door that we would have heard footsteps outside. These weren't the thickest of doors after all. It was weird, but that one can easily be explained by an adult, so I didn't think too much of it. The second experience, I was selected to drop off the roll call sheet in the school office one day, a major honor for a kid at that age. So I grabbed the sheet and exited the classroom and slowly made my way to the office, taking my time so I could miss as much of the morning math class as possible. My classroom was at the far end of the hallway, so I could burn a few minutes if I went slow enough. About halfway there, I heard footsteps behind me. My initial thought was the teacher had come to tell me to hurry up, except I didn't hear a door opening. It was winter and all the doors were closed. I stopped and looked behind me to see nothing. Most adults would have been confused, but I was a scared little kid, so I skipped ahead to freaking the heck out for reasons that will become more clear shortly and began to quicken my pace. Math didn't sound so bad at this point. Almost like out of a movie, the second I turned my head, the footsteps began again. Nope, time to break the rules and run like crazy to the office. I entered the office in a sprint and dropped the roll call sheet on the desk, and the confused notary looked at me. "You know you weren't supposed to run in the hall," was the initial response. Go figure, right? This third event had me up all night. Another occasion in which I and my friend were in class alone after everyone else was gone. I swear this wasn't a frequent occurrence. We were reasonably well-behaved kids. At one point, my friend left for reasons I don't remember, and I was left alone. Now, just to quickly fill you in, this incident occurred before the hallway footsteps, so I had no issue being alone. I was doing schoolwork in silence when I looked up to read the board and I saw my friend's shadow next to me fetching something from the back of the room. Except, he hadn't come back yet, and the door on the other side of me hadn't opened since he left. This shadow that I now focused on was too big, both in height and girth, to be my scrawny 9-year-old friend. I screamed and got out of there in a heartbeat, passing my teacher, who was immediately concerned, understandably. All I could get out of my mouth was heavy breaths, so the teacher went into the classroom. She came out and told me that there was nothing there. No people, animals, insects, or anything. At this time, my friend finally returned and was understandably confused. I told him later that he just looked at me strangely after I told him no. I must admit, though, he was surprisingly level-headed for a 9-year-old. I have thought about it many times, and can find some explanation, but the windows were just too high for someone to be looking through. And even if they weren't, that area was closed off from the students, so nobody would have been able to been there anyway. That was as bad as it got, thankfully. The next year we moved into a new, more modern building, and with the exception of my teachers, I had no new scary incidents. To basically cap off the whole story, there was one last twist. After the school had been demolished, the construction workers made a fascinating and yet terrifying discovery. Under that building lay at least 12 skeletons that dated back centuries. Theories ranging from the site once being a site where plague victims ended up to a temporary hospital during a battle on the outskirts of town could be found in the papers, but I don't think the origins of the body were ever truly discovered. That said, it certainly had my hair stand on end. Before I begin, I'm not sure how creepy the story really is, but if you take a moment to consider the unpredictability of the human psyche, this may fit into the category just fine. I grew up in a small town in southern New Jersey. I was an 18-year-old male, freshly out of high school and working my first jobs. My first job was a Blockbuster Video. It was pretty cool. The job was a cakewalk for the most part. It really just consisted of standing around renting out and checking in movies. Most of our customers were okay, save for one that I'll never forget. My coworkers and I dubbed her the Britney Spears lady. She was easily in her 40s, wore a pair of skin-tight jeans, tacky tube tops, wore makeup that screamed the clown college switched to Revlon, and always had her bleached blonde hair and pigtails. She was only missing the headset microphone. I'm not kidding. She was that customer that garnered a collective, "Oh snap, not again," when we saw her near dancing through the parking lot towards our store. She always acted like a snob and showed us that it was possible to function on 6 IQ points. In short, her personality sucked. Then came the day most of us will never forget, 9/11. I was at the bank dropping off a deposit for my manager while the chaos unfolded on the televisions behind the teller's desk. I rushed back to the store to find my manager in tears. The rest of the day was quiet. The franchise owner called and told us to shut down after we got everything cleaned up and made a sign stating we were closing earlier due to the events unfolding. We were just about to put the phones on the answering machine setting when you know who called. She spoke with my manager and informed her she was trapped in New York City with movies in her car. I pulled up her account and found, yes, she in fact had 11 films out. We found this to be a bit suspect because they had all been rented the night before. Still, my manager spoke to the owner and he gave her 5 days to get them back and he would waive the $200 fee. She shows up 12 days later. Mind you, my manager was still willing to wipe her slate clean up to 10 days worth of fees. That is until she comes through the door, yelling, scoffing, and eye-rolling. "I called you high school dropouts and told you I was trapped in the Poconos." Now, you don't have to be a geography major to figure out the Poconos Mountains are nowhere near New York. I watched my manager get so angry, I thought she was going to have an aneurysm. She flipped out on the lying, snotty woman and banned her from the store. On her way out, she screamed at a Spider-Man cutout. We were raffling off and failed miserably at trying to tip it over, almost spilling over as she pushed it. Of course, she tried to get my manager fired. Thank God for security footage showing everything she did, and yeah. The ban not only held firm at our store, but at the 6 other stores the franchise owner ran as well. So there you have it. The creepiest thing I have ever had a customer do in my 17 years of working is attempting to use a national tragedy as an excuse to get out of late fees. My childhood friend Max lived in a home that was relatively old. Well, old enough to have had something terrible happen to it. Rumor has it that a construction worker died on the job while building the house. Now, I can't say with 100% certainty that this happened, but it seems the most logical. Also, Max lives next to my grandparents' house. This was a 2-hour drive from my house. They live out in the middle of nowhere in a small town. This means I usually only saw him once every 2 or 3 months. Anyway, Max's parents got divorced and his mother couldn't afford the house much longer. I bring this up because I, at the time, never experienced anything paranormal while I was inside his house. It was around November 2012 when I visited Max at his old house for the last time. We did what normal 12-year-old kids do: eat junk food, explore the neighborhood, get in trouble, stuff like that. However, since this was our last time hanging out, I wanted this moment to go out with a bang. I forgot how we ended up talking about ghosts, but it happened. Anyway, 12-year-old me was hyped up on caffeine from some Pepsi, thought it was probably a good idea to provoke the ghost. Bad idea in hindsight. I placed the empty soda can on the floor and said, "If there's a ghost, please move this soda can." This happened 3 or more times before I could say it a 4th time. Across the house, the laundry door slammed. And I mean it slammed shut. Max and I looked at each other with opened mouths and wide eyes. For a reference point, imagine a long rectangle. Max and I were at the bottom right of the rectangle, and the laundry room was on the top left side of the rectangle. Anyway, Max and I slowly crept to the other side of the house to see what happened. I opened the laundry door and found nothing. Well, the ghost or demon or whatever also physically turned the light switch to the laundry room as well. Needless to say, we ran like a bat out of hell. Now I know what you're thinking. Something completely rational happened and we're overthinking it. Well, you're wrong. Max's mother was at her day job, and it was only Max and me at his house when it happened. Nobody else. Okay, what about the wind? The only thing opened was the front door, which was right next to us. Either way, no wind was blowing that day, and there was no draft to speak of. There's also no way wind could travel from the entrance of the house, turn 90 degrees left, go down the kitchen all the way to the laundry room. That also doesn't explain how the light switch got flipped. After the incident, I went back home and haven't talked to Max since. I do occasionally ride past the house and think of that incident. I've also had several severe paranormal cases happen at my own house after visiting Max's house. This makes me believe I was followed home by an unknown entity. I live in Joplin. When the EF5 came through in 2011, I was at work. It was almost closing time, and I was outside smoking a cigarette because the store was dead. I noticed incredibly low clouds, almost as if I could reach up and touch them, and saw the sky change colors from the overcast gray to a sort of hazy green or yellow. I finished my cigarette, went inside, and looked at the radar. It was gnarly. I heard sirens. I'd heard them a million times before and always ignored them. I did the same here, though I suspected a tornado was imminent based largely on old wives' tales about the green skies. I texted my wife to tell her that a tornado was possible and to be safe. She asked me when and where. I told her that's not the kind of thing I could guess at. That's the last time we spoke for several hours. I got a call from a coworker telling me he was going to chase a tornado. I told him to be safe and called him an idiot, and started to get ready to lock up. We were supposed to close at 6, but it was a sales job with bad weather on graduation day, and only like 3 customers all day. I didn't figure locking up early would be a problem. The rain had already started at this point. Soft at first, but picking up quickly. I tidied up, did some paperwork, and went to lock the door. The front of the store is all glass, and when I looked out, I could see debris on the ground basically crossing the street just to my south. It looked like dirt and rocks, maybe some scrap wood. Stuff was definitely flying. I knew right then what was happening, though not exactly how bad it was about to get. Someone pulled into the parking lot, presumably seeking shelter. I tried to open the door to let them in, but couldn't push it open. I'm about 6 foot, and at the time weighed probably 280 pounds or so, and I couldn't physically move the door. That's when I knew exactly how bad it was about to get. The windows started to shake, almost bowing. I backed away quickly and watched as it hit me that this was now a life or death situation. I had worked in TV news before and knew just how dangerous this stuff can be. I went to lock myself in my boss's office, but he'd locked the door for the weekend. Before I could turn to head to another room, the roof was gone. Holy crap, this is happening. I don't know why, but I thought the safest thing to do would be to squeeze myself as much into the door frame of my boss's office as I could. That's what I did. Something flew through the store and hit me in the back. It hit me so hard I spun all the way around, on the ground, and landed on my stomach. I put my right hand and arm over the back of my head. I pulled my phone out of my pocket with the left hand and tried to frantically call everyone I could. I tried to call 911 as if firefighters could show up and stop what was happening. I tried to call my family to tell them I needed help ASAP. I tried calling my wife to tell her I loved her. I just knew I was going to die, and I needed to tell her that I loved her before it happened. Nothing. Cell signal was gone. so I laid there trying to protect my phone in case I survived so I could get help. I waited to die. That's the most messed up thing I've ever experienced. The next seconds are a blur. I heard everything but saw nothing. I kept my face buried. After what felt like hours, it just kind of all stopped. The rain tapered to a sprinkle. What felt like hail, but definitely could have been debris falling, stopped. I just laid there. I honestly wasn't sure if I had died or not. Then I heard the screaming. It came from all different directions. People screaming for help. For some reason, that told me it was okay to get up. I stood up and looked around, and there was a van in the middle of what used to be a pizza place next door. I think it had been thrown from the academy across the street. It hadn't been there before. I was the only person in my store, and everyone in the pizza place seemed okay. The other screams were too far away, so I just ran. A car drove by, and I flagged it down. It was a couple from California. They were only in town for a graduation and had never seen anything like this. I was covered in blood, with open wounds all over my head, neck, and arms. I could hear the wife tell the husband to leave me and that they needed to save themselves. But he said, "He's hurt, we can't just leave him." Thanks, dude. I got in the back seat with their kids. They were very young and very scared. The bloody, bruised stranger sitting next to them only made that worse. I had to coach the couple a little bit about not driving over power lines and how to use a defrost for the windshield. Seriously, the wife was just wiping the condensation with a towel. And it would be just coming right back. They were panicking just like I was. It was chaos. The husband asked me where I needed to go. I said, "I'll go wherever, just get me away from here." So they took me to the Motel 6 they were staying at. When we got there were a bunch of people standing around. The motel luckily hadn't been hit, so everyone there was safe for the most part. They were just watching the show. The never-ending parade of emergency vehicles flooding into the city. Hundreds, it seemed, in the couple of hours I sat there. The people at the motel saw me and flew into action. One woman busted out a first aid kit, another guy was grabbing me towels to dry off. My favorite person that afternoon gave me a few cigarettes because mine were ruined after being in my pocket after all of this. After they got me settled and calmed down, the woman who was doctoring me up asked me how bad it was. I remember exactly what I said to her. "It's gone." "What's gone?" she said. "All of it. Everything. For miles. I could see the hospital. It's on fire." I'll never forget the look in her eyes when I said that. The hospital was a few miles from my store. I couldn't see the building itself, but I could see the fire. I knew exactly what it was from. It takes a big building to shoot flames that high. Some of you may remember this storm knocked the gigantic building off of its foundation. After I sucked down a cigarette, I tried calling again. Nothing. My phone was waterlogged too. I just set it down and went back outside. I figured I'd eventually walk home if I had to, but I wasn't doing it until I was certain the storms had passed and I wouldn't be in any rescuer's way. Eventually, that same woman came outside holding my phone. "Whose phone is this?" It was ringing. The one phone call had left in it. I thanked her, took it and answered it. It was my mom. Are you okay?" she said. "Yeah, I'm okay. Are you guys okay?" "Yeah." "Is my wife okay? Have you talked to her?" "Yeah, everybody's fine." "Is your house still there? Is my house still there?" "Yeah, everything's okay. It didn't really come out here. Where are you?" I was so relieved at that moment that I was the only person in my family to experience this. I thought at the time I would be the only one who was mentally strong enough to be okay after something like this. I found out later I was wrong about that, but I felt good at that moment. My mom called my wife and told her where I was. She and her parents came to get me. A couple of hours later, they got through the traffic and showed up. She took me home and spent an hour or so pulling the glass out of my scalp and picking out pieces of asphalt and gravel that had been embedded in my ears and neck. My boss was out of town and didn't believe a tornado had hit. When he found out it was true, he immediately tried to get to me. His wife eventually found my wife on Facebook and we were able to speak. He was incredible through everything. The next few days were filled with very little sleep and crippling fear. I didn't lose my cool until later. No crying, nothing. It was surreal. The following weeks, months, and years were full of panic attacks and anxiety medication, though. I dealt with survivor's guilt for a long time. I thought for sure the people who pulled up looking for help had died in the storm. I couldn't prove it, but they weren't there when I got up. I found out later by happenstance that they survived. I never saw the couple from California again, and I never got to thank them. I'd love to maybe try to track them down someday to thank them for taking a chance on me. I am mostly okay now, save for about 6 weeks in April and May. I've dealt with it and I'm over it. We take sirens very seriously now.
Around first grade, I became friends with this kid named Stan. He was a couple of years older than I was, but he had a sister that was my age who I was also friends with. I also had a crush on their oldest brother, James. I was that girl who chased the poor, uninterested boys all around the playground. I lost contact with all 3 kids around middle school. Of course, when Facebook happened, I began getting in touch with people I had gone to school with. It was a moderately sized K through 8th grade school, so you were basically with the same exact group of kids for each grade. This makes some pretty strong bonds, because there's a lot of us who kept in contact after moving on to high school for a little while before drifting apart. Because of this, I was always really excited when I got back in touch with those people. However, not all of these connections have been positive. I got a friend request from Stan one day, under a different name. The messages were the typical, "How's it going? What have you been up to?" etc. Then he started sending messages that were about my looks. They weren't obscene, but they did make me a bit uncomfortable. He started pushing to meet up. I can't explain it, but I just had a really off feeling about him, so I could kind of avoid making any kind of plans. He continued to be pushy about things, and finally I just stopped responding to his messages. He started pushing to meet up. I can't explain it, but I just had this really off feeling about him, so I would kind of avoid making any kind of plans with him. He continued to be pushy about things, and I finally just stopped responding to his messages. I should also message that when I first accepted Stan's friend request, he literally went through every single one of my pictures and liked them. That should have been my first clue, but I just let it go. Then I started getting messages from my friends and even some family members asking me about him. Stan was basically going through and sending everyone friend requests. By this point, I'm like, okay, this is definitely weird. But things got really nuts when my cousin informed me that Stan had not only tried to friend her, but he'd also sent her a message asking all sorts of questions about me, such as things I liked or places I liked to go. My cousin was concerned that he was sending all these kind of messages to people who might actually tell him what he wanted to know. I debated sending Stan a message to tell him to back off, but decided just to block him and changed all my Facebook settings to make it as private as I possibly could. I also sent out a mass message to all my friends and family.